like to call to order this
Recording in progress.
meeting of the Finance Committee, Select Board, and School Committee, February 1st, 2024. As a reminder, this is being recorded. We'll start with open forum. Does anyone have anything for open forum?
I have one thing.
Sure, go ahead.
The town of Westford just put out a survey for residents to help us redesign our webpage. So we know a lot of people are going to the website right now to look at budget data. If you wouldn't mind taking a survey, it's linked off of the homepage, and we're going to be using that feedback to prepare a new website that will be launching in July of 2024.
Thanks. Okay, so let's go into our introduction and review of the budget issues. Super brief, and just anything new.
Sure. So we've adjusted the presentation. It will not be as long. We know we all can recite the original presentation by heart. So I adjusted the slides slightly this afternoon. Next slide, Dan, please. Just wanted to again remind people of where we've been in the journey and where we're going. I will not read this slide verbatim, but I did insert February of 2024 towards the bottom, that we're going to be finalizing the budget numbers after these Finance Committee public hearings end. We're going to finalize the override request, and then there will be public hearings on the town meeting warrant articles through the Finance Committee, and also the Select Board will be reviewing those articles at their future meetings coming up. Next slide, please. Did want to draw people's attention to our Town of Westford website. If you go to www.westfordma.gov, on the homepage, there's a link for budget materials right at the top. So that is towards the top of this page here. And then once you get into that budget page, we list our current fiscal 24 budget, the proposed fiscal 25 budget, and associated documents. Along the right-hand side, we have our meetings coming up, and we are starting to accumulate a list of frequently asked questions. So those are all clickable and available. We will be continuing to populate those frequently asked questions and update this site as we go along. Again, we'll not reiterate all of our budget challenges, but they're here on the slide, and they continue to be the forefront of our discussions at these budget hearings. And also just want to highlight the next steps. We have added some items. On February 13th, the Select Board will set the warrant articles order with the moderator. The February 15th will be a busy day. We actually will be meeting with the Westford Academy students, going to them. We'll be meeting with Westford Rotary, and then we'll have that Finance Committee hearing or meeting on the warrant articles. And just reminding people that town meeting is March 23rd at 9 a.m. at Westford Academy. I think that's really everything else. You can just breeze through the slides. They're all repeats. If anyone needs to go back to them, we're happy to do that. Town efficiencies, budget variables, and then how people can get help on exemptions, and then how the public can stay involved. Again, these links are all live.
Great.
So happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so to start off our budget hearing recap from the previous meeting, which was Health Department, Council on Aging, Public Safety, any comments from Finance Committee on how that hearing went, or thoughts?
I just have one, and that's, I do have a concern about reducing senior tax work-off when we also are trying to fund interns. That I think that some of that work could be done by the senior tax work-off. I do believe that we will be seeing potentially more desire to utilize that relief if we're going forward with an override and larger impact. So it's just something I want to be aware of and be cautious of reducing that potential relief.
Thanks. Yeah, as we went through those last week, I would say things to look at, recurring things that have happened before. First of all, I think we talked about the police turnover. I think that's constant issue with drain of money. I still think that there's an issue of reorganization that could be occurred. I know the chief disagrees with me, but it should be considered. Fire department made a good point about the truck rollouts. However, the truck rollouts are expensive. And if there's a way that, for some of the other uses that they use the fire apparatus for that are not emergency related, if they could be reduced, that's gonna give us a little bit of a bang for our buck. And I still think the staffing at the captain's level should be looked at. I think it's a little redundant. And then the last thing was, the thing that came up was the issue with the senior council on aging. The expense for that fuel, they're in a conundrum. They don't know whether to raise the donation or lower the fee. I mean, lowering the fee and making it consistent so that you get money in will give some kind of revenue to them, which they're not getting now. So those are some things that I picked up at that last meeting.
Okay, thanks. Heather?
But on that COA, we have some more information that we requested from her, kind of running out of time, so I don't know if we would go over that Monday, try and get it out of them for
Yeah,
Friday.
we can look at that and add it to Monday. I didn't have time to look at that either.
I don't think we've gotten it.
I thought we got something.
Oh, did we?
Okay. Maybe it's different. We'll talk
Okay.
about it. Okay, maybe it was different information.
And then my last little plug, we should handle all fixed assets the same. Police cruisers should come out of operating. That's it.
Anyone online? I don't think so. Anybody
By the way,
else?
that was another issue, is I didn't realize how expensive the hybrids were for them. That's still a problem. I think he sees it tailing off in the future, but that's gonna have to be watched.
Yeah, yeah. I think it seems to be offsetting with the savings in fuel. So
Yep.
for right now, I think we're okay. But yeah, good point. Okay. Let's move on to our 7:15 item agenda, and it's the reserve fund transfer request from our town clerk, Lori Shaw.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Laurie Shaw, I'm the new town clerk. So Westford will be using poll pads for the first time this year for their elections. In the past, they use them for town meeting. I've had experience in the past using poll pads for both elections and town meeting. Poll pads are a great use of technology. They maximize the efficiency of the election process. To start, they make quick check-in and ease for the voters and the election workers. Poll pads are the electronic way to replace a paper checklist at the polls. They increase accuracy with the number of the voter check-ins. They'll flag and notify the poll workers if a ballot is sent out by early voting and let the voter know if a ballot has been returned. So the voter cannot vote more than one time. It will completely eliminate timely scanning of each individual voter, which we do in the office, that would have been on the voter list. For several days after the election, the clerk office has to scan in every voter from this huge list. The process can take days. The poll pad eliminates the task completely by keeping count of the voters through the software on the poll pad. So what I'm asking is for label printers that are specifically for early voting. The voters check in and a label is printed. The label will secure onto the ballot during the early voting process. And this would eliminate the possibility of the paper ripping off the ballot as we're collecting the ballots and bringing them back to the office. These labels also have barcodes on them and will allow us to scan in the information that is on the ballot, which has the voter's name and address and the party. Currently, the label printers are not included in the budget, and I would like to include them in the budget for FY24.
Dan, what's our reserve fund balance?
90,000.
90,000. Okay. Anyone have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Dennis.
So, these poll pads, you mentioned, the purpose of this money is to generate a number that gets affixed to what? The ballot?
Ballot, yes.
Okay, so the ballot will have an identification number that corresponds with the voter, is that how it works?
So when the voter checks in on the poll pad through the poll pad process, the label printer will print out the information with the voter's name and address on it. And it has a barcode. So we affix the label to the envelope that the ballot goes in. And then we bring the day that the voters are voting, every day when they come in to vote, we have to put the ballots, we have to scan them in so that the voter gets credit for it. So these labels also have a barcode on them, and we can scan them right in, and it puts the information from the barcode right into our state system.
Yeah, so just let me ask you the question about the anonymity of the ballot. How is the anonymity of the ballot preserved?
The ballot is still inside a sealed envelope, so the envelope is never opened. During early voting, we collect the envelopes, the ballot is sealed inside the envelope. But the beauty of the label is this barcode on the label will allow us to scan the ballot into the state system to let us know and the voter know, if they decide to check, that the ballot has been cast. However, we do not open those ballots until they go to the polling locations on election day.
Okay.
So this lets the voter know and us know that the ballot has been cast.
Is that labeled on the envelope or on the ballot itself?
It's on the envelope.
Okay.
It's on the envelope that the ballot goes in.
And that's just so that the person somebody can't vote again as that person? Is that the reason?
That's correct.
Okay. And
That's
what did
correct.
you do before?
Good question.
So
Before you
this
had
was
the poll
before
pads
early voting. Before,
But I mean, I think well, correct me, but I thought the poll pads were new. We haven't used them for voting.
for elections.
For elections. But we've had early voting before. So if you early voted, a year or two ago, what did you do?
I'm not sure what Westford did for early voting. I'm not sure. I believe what probably would have happened, which happened in most municipalities, was the voter would just write in their name and address on the envelope.
Okay.
And then we would collect the envelopes, and then we would bring them over on election day and put them through the
It
machines.
saves time to have the label maker as well. 'Cause with
Correct.
our handwriting, you can actually read what people say rather than trying to decipher handwriting.
And we can just quickly go through them, because with early voting now, the process is we have to add the ballots into our state system every day that someone early voted. We don't collect them anymore and put them away until election day. So they have to be scanned in every day, and in many cases, we could have hundreds and.
And again, it's just to check off that the person voted so that they can't come back the next day and vote again.
Correct, and it puts it in our state system and tallies it in our state system, as well as the iPads.
But not the actual
Yeah,
votes,
yeah.
just.
But not the votes. The envelopes are not even opened.
So this only pertains to early voting, right? It's only
The
early voting.
label printers, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What are the poll pads? What's their full gamut then? Is it poll pads all confined to early voting as well, or is
No,
there?
the poll pads are for elections and early voting and town meeting. It's a check-in process.
Okay. Is there anything that's affixed to the ballot at all?
For early voting, yes. When you go to the polls, there's a regular printer and a paper receipt that comes out. The paper receipt is just for the clerk's office to keep track of the voters in another way. It's a backup way to keep track. But if you,
Sorry, I think the question was if something is actually attached to the ballot at all in this process.
Nothing is ever attached to
no,
that.
nothing is attached to the ballot.
The poll pad, the thing that scans your license,
Yes, it could.
you don't. We
It
don't
has
use
the
for that?
ability, but it's up to the voter whether they want to present us with their license.
Is that what we use it for then, or do we use it for something else?
The,
The poll pads that we do use,
mhm,
we do the driver's license.
it's,
scanner.
yes, and there'll be signs at the polls that say you can present your license if you like, but we won't ask you for your license. It's just another quick way to pull up the voter's name.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when a voter goes to the poll pad, shows his or her identification, and then says, "Give me the ballot," right? You get the ballot. That verification is contained within the system, and once the verification is done, it forgets
Yes.
the data.
Yes, it doesn't hang, yes.
It's not going to send it to the system.
No, the system is not connected to Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So there's no,
How does it scan and validate your ID if it's not connected to Wi-Fi?
you know what,
Everything's
I'm,
preloaded a day or two in advance.
So all our license, Massachusetts license data is loaded?
The voter list.
The voter
the
list
voter
is,
list.
the voter
But when I
list is.
present my driver license.
They're just getting your name and address.
so what it does is it scans the picture of your license and pulls
so it's
it up
scan-
from the address on the license, but it doesn't store the information in the system.
Got it. So it's actually recognizing the text on the license
Yes.
face and trying to make sense of
Yes.
it.
So to simplify this a little bit for the board, we have purchased 20 poll pads. We used a number of them at town meeting in October. We have not used them for elections. The previous clerk did not purchase the printers going along with it. I don't think she realized the need or the ease of them for early voting. So Lori is bringing before the printer request as well as the labels for your consideration this evening.
Is there a lot
other
of early
questions?
voting in Westford?
From what I've seen in the past, yes, and early voting can be difficult to track because more people are wanting to early vote. So yes, the numbers are going up as the years are going on.
One last round for questions, and then I'll ask for a motion.
I just have a question of whether or not, it's a relatively small amount, so it's not a huge ask. But I just wonder if it's something that could possibly be absorbed in another line. And just with the knowledge that if at the end of the year something is too tight, you know, maybe that's a better time to do a transfer. So,
It's a pretty tight budget, so I would say no.
okay.
We're already running up against costs because of the 2 elections that are occurring within this fiscal year.
Then another issue coming up is the the local elections. We talked about that earlier, where if somebody checks off on that voter card that went out, all elections, it didn't used to include the local election, and now the state is changing their mind, saying it does include it. So we do need to take that into consideration too.
Could I get a motion?
I move to
Second?
Second.
Second. I'm gonna do a roll call. Beth?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Dennis?
Nay?
Shinji?
Aye.
Harry?
Aye.
Aye. Shelby? Anybody, there's nobody else online, right? Just Shelby?
Yep.
Okay, and I'm an aye, so it passes not unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, back into our budget, our department budget reviews, and we have the rec enterprise back up again.
Beginning of the meeting this time.
Hello again, everyone. So thank you for having me back tonight to present some meaningful data that was requested at my first budget hearing. I would like to start by saying that for the past 2 years, the staff at the Recreation Department has worked diligently to recover from the impact the pandemic had on our staff and on our programs. We've gone from canceling 3 core programs in 2020, WPC After School Program, Kids Club, and Destination Exploration, and furloughing our entire staff, to completely restaffing our department, which was not without its challenges for us as well as many other employers in the childcare industry. Once stabilized, our laser focus has been on bringing our 3 biggest revenue maker programs back to pre-COVID numbers. We're not quite there yet, but we are certainly trending upward, as you can see from the spreadsheet showing total WPC registration numbers that was in your packet. We are working on bringing in several new vendor programs as well as refining existing programs. We are also keeping in mind that some of our program fees may experience minimal increases to keep pace with the costs. Finally, we are being more proactive about our program promotion by getting the word out on several social media platforms, newsletters, and emails. With that being said, I come before you tonight with information pertaining to the cost effectiveness of programs and if the department is covering the costs. The 4 spreadsheets in your packet represent FY 22, 23 actuals and 24 and 25 projected revenue and expenses per program. Also included in your packet is a recreation analysis spreadsheet showing how the elimination of the enterprise budget will negatively impact the general fund budget, and Dan can walk you through that in a bit. Lastly, as far as FY 24 is concerned, our spring and summer registrations will be up and running by the end of February. I will be able to provide you with more accurate revenue data once these registrations start to come in. And the same goes for WPC Session 4, which begins in March, but I'm hoping to have most of that revenue collected by April. And lastly, we are diligently working on benchmark comparisons, and we'll be prepared to come back to you with the data in the next coming months.
Thanks. One question, what's the rec enterprise retained earnings balance?
It'll take me just a second to find
Okay.
Christina.
If somebody else has a question, can go, and then Dan, when you have it. Anyone have questions?
Can the rec enterprise retained earnings go negative?
No.
I think so.
What happens if any given year they spend more than they receive?
We have to pick it up, right? The town has to.
Right, we would be responsible for it, but we have a budget, so it'd be something like the revenue didn't come in that we were expecting, that we would have to cover that deficit, so.
So
We did in COVID.
Yeah.
We had to do that in COVID, yeah.
since of carrying negative retained earnings, the actually town covers the expenses and make it zero.
Yeah. Heather, you had a question?
Yeah, on one of the spreadsheets, it shows the revenue, and then at the bottom, there's a negative for recreation program charges. What is that?
Oh, it's credit card fees that are used. They take a percentage, so we spread those over the programs.
Do you charge extra for a credit card?
No.
I think that should be considered, because I know the town does if you pay your property taxes online by credit card. But you charge, the individual pays it.
The individual with the credit card.
Right.
We don't actually say we pay more, it's just.
Right, but
Right.
the payer is covering the fee, whereas
Yeah.
your department is covering that fee.
On some of them, yes. Our software also is charged per registration too. So the amount of people that register through MyRec, our expense for that is based on how many registrations come in. But if they pay through City Hall systems, there is a charge that they have to pay if they're gonna use a credit card, and there's no charge if they're gonna use an e-check, so.
And did you have that?
Got your number, yep. So to start the year, we had 547,000 retained earnings, but we back out the appropriation for town meeting, so we have 422,000 available.
Anyone else have questions,
Yeah.
comments?
Dan, could you kind of walk us through the, that analysis of the impact on the general?
The one pager, yep.
Yeah, just, I looked at it and I kind of get it, but I just would like to.
Sure, I'm gonna share my screen, so people can see this at home too. We can find, here we go. Okay, so here we have the Recreation Enterprise FY20 budget. We have the needs based on the left and the Prop 2.5 restricted budget on the right. So the only difference is $15,000 to personal services. So here, I broke out the direct and indirect expenses from the actual expense line. They're built in during the budget. So we can see the impact of that. So those direct and indirect expenses are offset to the operating budget under that 940 direct indirect expense account, so that all the enterprises work that way. So if you just looked at the recreation enterprise budget and those direct and indirect, the total cost, I'm gonna use the restricted budget as the example, is $1,007,000. So the revenue that we're bringing in is $958,000 plus those retained earnings, it's $1,083,000. So if you were just to back out the rec enterprise budget, the revenue and retained earnings offsetting, and the offset in the 940 budget, it's actually $75,000 to the bad for the general fund. Because I'm gonna explain further here. This is the simplified version of this view. So next, I want to look at those direct and indirect costs, which are listed up here, the 186,000. These are all the things that are allocated against the recreation enterprise. So we have a portion of the salary for town manager, finance, accounting, the audit, all these things. Basically, everything would still exist within the budget except for workers' comp for the recreation employees, which is about $18,000. Now, going down below to the direct costs, we have health and life insurance, Medicare, and Middlesex retirement. The health and life insurance would go away in this instance if we were just to stop recreation. So would the Medicare. But the Middlesex retirement is a set amount, so we would have to absorb that $107,000 within the operating budget too. So even after accounting for those costs, we're still looking at a negative impact to the general fund of $22,000 if rec enterprise were to go away. Now, there was questions too about like, can't we just get rid of the enterprise, the subsidy and whatnot? So we can't really do that. We have a little bit of wiggle room within reason, because if you lower the expenses too much, you have to lower the revenue with it, because we can't offer that programming too. So we're in the ballpark of, you know, how much could we reduce within the Prop 2.5 budget? We're looking at about $15,000 before we start getting in trouble and possibly lowering the revenue deficit. So, does that make sense? Somewhat, kind of. It's a lot with the offsets.
It made more
but
sense when I was on the phone with you yesterday. I don't know
Yeah.
why it's not making sense now.
And just follow up, I'm assuming it's just a percentage base for the indirect costs that's,
Yeah, it's based on different factors, but it's in the budget, like behind.
yeah.
But a lot of it's like personal service, like percentage of recreation personal services versus the rest of the town.
So what you're saying is this account sort of underpins a whole series of other issues, right, or other items that if you pulled it out, you'd draw all that out as well, right?
Right, so, exactly, so like part of people's salaries in there,
Yeah.
which would remain, so it's not like it's not straightforward, so I put this together, to kind of explain the impact, so.
That's good.
Christina, I have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Dan, could we look at the program by program spreadsheet that you did? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the math correctly.
Sure.
I'm looking at the 25 override budget version. It's the fourth sheet on that set. So looking at this, it looks like with the indirect costs, that 186, the 186 is basically the shared overhead coverage, right? You just covered those numbers another way.
Yes.
Okay. So it's a $250,000 loss. I agree it sort of makes sense to hold rec department harmless of this allocation choice that we're making with a 186. But it does look like there's still a $75,000 shortfall, even if we decide to do the indirect costs differently and not put them in here, you'd still be running at a deficit of $75,000 or so, which is the same number you had on the other sheet.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that's the policy question for me is, does it make sense on a program basis, if we take the shared overhead issue out, does it make sense that we should be continuing to operate at a deficit? Should the town taxpayers be subsidizing the rec programs to the tune of $75,000 in this budget? And I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. I think if you take the indirect cost out of the consideration, that's basically what's happening. It's sort of a straight subsidy from the general fund to these programs.
That's correct, yep, that's always been the history of this, going back since the enterprise began, I believe in 07 or 08, there's always been a subsidy involved with it.
Has the subsidy always been, in effect, greater than the indirect cost coverage?
In the like this year, it's a lot higher than the indirect cost because we're still coming out of COVID. So
Yeah.
the way the DOR makes you set revenue, we had to be a little cautious with our projections. But
Right.
it's cut in half this year, over in half. And then historically, we've ranged between 30,000 to 140,000 based on those direct and indirect costs.
Yeah, so I guess to me, it would make sense on a policy point of view if it's breaking even on a program basis with the indirect costs taken out, or it's contributing, which would be great. And it sounds like in some past years, the subsidy was less than the shared overhead absorption, in which case, you're exactly right, it's actually generating cash, it's just an accounting mishap. So, I don't know, just my thought as we bring this whole thing together is it doesn't seem right to me that the general fund would subsidize the programs, and in this budget, it does subsidize programs by $75,000. I guess I'd be interested to know if we're seeing a trend that would recover all the way from what we saw in the pandemic. Because it could be that the program enrollment will continue to grow. It looks like in the past 2 years, it hasn't. If I look at the 22-23 and the 23-24 WPC after-school program, that's just one program. But it looks like it's well short of the old pre-pandemic levels, and it did increase a little bit. What do you expect it to continue? I mean, to come back up?
Yes, both in after school and summer. We always expect our numbers to increase. However, since this time, there's more competition out there. There was a time where the Road and Bush after school program was closed and we absorbed their children, so you're always running into those kind of situations where, yeah, we would love to see our numbers grow.
Okay.
Personally, in where I have been in since before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now coming out of it, I'm optimistic that my numbers will grow. Especially if we keep our costs reasonable and affordable for, our participants.
Okay, well, as we continue the budget process, that'll be on my mind is, do we think we're gonna recover to the fact where there's effectively no cross-subsidy? That would be great. I think that would be totally appropriate. If we think we're gonna continue to have a subsidy from the general fund, I guess that's at least a concern to me. But thank you for doing the analysis this way. I know it was a ton of work.
That's where my thinking is as well, with the subsidy. The other thing is, Dan, I mean, if let's say the rec enterprise didn't have any retained earnings, the town would be on the hook for the other 125 as well. Like, the subsidy could be more if retained earnings was low, correct?
It could be, yeah. So we do have a little bit of flexibility there, but they have a pretty good balance of retained earnings too. So because Michelle is cautious with the budget, so anything we don't need to spend, we close out, and that generates more retained earnings for future use.
Sure.
So
But I guess, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, if we think this is a temporary recovery still, is it appropriate, instead of having the town subsidize $75,000, to take another 75 out of the retained earnings balance? That's something that you could do.
Yeah, it's something. It's like using one-time funds for.
But
It's just a level of.
If we don't think
yeah.
we're recovering, we should make a cut, is my argument. If we think we're recovering, let's give it some space, because then we can get back to the break-even point, is the argument. Okay.
So that could be one of the options,
Yeah,
applying
that
some
could
more
be-
retained earnings to help out with the budget
Right.
for this year.
Because you could argue, if you look back in time, that the retained earnings actually has come from the general fund, just in an indirect way. So I personally, I would be on board. I would rather see that 75 come out of retained earnings, and let's see where this goes over the next couple of years, and then that's your deal. You can figure that out.
Like, yes, okay.
Yeah. Anyone, go ahead, Heather.
I totally agree with that. That's where I stand too, that we can't subsidize it. And I think there's some line items right off that, concessions at the waterfront. I mean, the town is, or the retained earnings is subsidizing selling a Coke to someone on the beach because they're not even covering the direct costs. So I think we give it time, you use retained earnings and then make decisions, and that'll give you time to kind of look at some of these programs, make sure that they're not offered somewhere else at a better price that kind of cannibalizes your revenues. But then also the other thing I want to point out is we need to remember, one of these programs from the schools, I think, is not, doing particularly well, but we're also not paying the schools to use their facilities, and that should maybe be factored into that too.
Did you have something to add, Dan?
Well, just with paying the schools, I mean, it would be the general fund paying the general fund, because we'd have to increase the subsidies, so it's.
But not if not if they're self-sustaining, right?
I think your point is that there are other
Cost.
well, not that there are other costs, but there's competition in the area that is also paying for their space, and they're making money. So, at least that's where my mind is going. It's kind of like,
Right, but I'm
so
not
is there
even-
something else kind of going on here?
Right, and I kind of think some of their expenses might need to be even increased a little bit for the additional maintenance or cleaning or whatever from the schools that the clubs might incur. I mean, I know it all comes out unless you're self-sustained within the enterprise, then it doesn't.
So in the enterprise, there is money in there for the school custodians for the summer months when they wouldn't typically have coverage. So that's built into the enterprise budget for the summer. Pay those direct costs.
Just one more. First of all, my kids went through the program, so I certainly appreciate the value of it, and I appreciate the work that was put into this. The one caution I would have, especially looking at the WPC program, is that you may never actually get back to pre-COVID numbers, and that's by no fault of yours. It's from what I'm understanding, the enrollment in the schools is lower, right? So that's one piece, is that there are things that are completely out of your control in this, and I do think that it's valuable to just keep in mind that programs will ebb and flow, and you may have to shut one down, not WPC necessarily, but you may have to shut one down and bring something else in that will reinvigorate your input, and I do believe that your department will be looking for those opportunities. So.
Anybody have anything else? Thank you so much, Michelle, for
You're
coming back
welcome.
with all the information.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a good night. Thanks.
Thanks.
We actually had a question online.
Oh.
Oh,
Hang on.
do I have to
Jamie
say-
Holmes. Would there be a cost savings if you consolidated schools you held the after-school program at? Maybe all K-2 schools could bus to their 3-5 sister school?
So, because we're licensed by the state, numbers would have to change. I'm licensed for X amount of children in the school. But one of the problems with that, or challenges I should say, is the bus transportation. It's so expensive. And to pay for that, that was one of the major reasons why we had to close down the middle school program, because the busing was just kind of drowning us a little bit. So, and not to mention, will transportation be guaranteed? I've spoken to Renee at D-Bus Company about this already, and one of the challenges that could come into play is finding the appropriate amount of buses to transport kids to and from. So, and parents really like the fact that their young kindergartners don't need to get on a bus and travel anywhere. They can walk right down to the cafeteria, and it's
Yeah,
safety.
It's convenient.
I just have a quick question. The morning program is through the schools.
That
but
is
the
correct.
afternoon is through you.
Correct.
Okay.
So, regarding the transportation, would the general bus, after pickup, drop off bus service could drop them into the other school? Like instead of my son going from Nabnasset to my house, he would be going from Nabnasset to Abbott.
No, and they would have to pay for a bus pass on top of paying for their tuition. And that's one of the things that parents don't have to worry about, is a bus pass, because they're going right to the after-school program.
And it would essentially be an additional bus from
Correct.
whatever school.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could we get an update though, like in a few months or something? Just, it could just be an email, like update these, the sheets?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
I have more revenue coming in, like I said, my summer registrations are gonna be coming in, and WPC sessions, I mean, I have a lot more revenue,
Great.
pure data coming in the next few months. I'll be more than happy to update all of you on that.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, have a great night.
Okay, next up, we've got the Westford Public Schools. See, school committee.
Just you here now?
Yep.
Yeah, no quorum. Yeah.
Should be Catherine, Mari, and Bill at least online.
Oh, sorry, they're attendees. I can promote them. Bill's here.
I'm not sure if Sean is finished up or able to.
It's here.
Can I compliment you again, Dan? That analysis was exactly the analysis I had in my head.
Okay.
That was great.
While we're waiting to see if we have a quorum, I'll just, if anyone has a question,
You-
why don't we?
You
if you
do
wanna-
have a quorum, Marisol's here too, so I just promoted 4.
Call to order this meeting of
Anybody
Yes.
wants to go first?
So I had an original question. When you, the last time that you came before us, we were discussing the contracts that came up. And from the conversation, I got that there was, you explained the settlement with the Unit A, and you also explained the settlement with regard to the custodians and the grounds folks. I was still concerned or confused about the explanation on Unit E. And I got the impression that there was a lot of flexibility in this particular thing. Can you explain the settlement with Unit E and what other contracts are pending that you guys have settled?
Sure, so the only contracts right now, Unit G, which is our interventionists and academic coaches, we have a tentative agreement on. They just haven't had their vote and it hasn't come to the school committee yet.
Okay.
And then, that's the only contract that's outstanding. Our food services contract, that expires this June. So this spring, we'll be beginning negotiations with food services. So those are the only 2 contracts that are not, well, the food services is settled, but will be opening up. So the Unit G contract is the only one that's not officially settled and completely voted by their membership and the school committee so far. In terms of the Unit E, in my answer to your question that you had submitted earlier, what I was trying to explain was that where we were able to give you a specific percentage for the other units because it was more universal across the unit. With Unit E, the different percentages, as we were adjusting the salary scale and the new salary scale, which we shared in the questions for you all to see, there were just differences in some of the steps as far as what that percentage was. So our lower percentage, our entry role was below minimum wage.
Okay.
So we needed to adjust that. It impacted some of the other closer steps as well too. And so some of them were raised at a higher percentage than others. And that's what I was trying to say, is that there wasn't like where I could say this Unit G, we've settled at these 3 numbers over the next 3 years. Unit E, within the salary scale, there really wasn't, I mean, we could give you an overall average, but it really wouldn't be, I don't think it would be specific to each one of the different steps, if you will, in the salary. But there is no flexibility within it. It is settled, right? Like there's no moving parts in the Unit E negotiations. I mean, that contract is settled and settled through FY25.
Well, the reason I was raised the concern was when I looked at when we were discussing some of the positions that were associated with it, there were, and I understand your explanation, that there were ranges as much as 7-8%. And I'm assuming that's the makeup with the trying to get the step increases adjusted. I think what I'm looking for is how much ranges like that are we seeing across the board over the next few years? Will this be a one-time, like 70%, or would you expect next year that it'll be a more uniformed increase, and what would that percentage be?
Oh, excellent. Okay, I understand. If, not having it right in front of me, the initial adjustments were in the first year. I'm pretty sure, would you remember if the next 2 years for FY '24 and FY '25, if we had, I don't think it was, I think to Dennis's point, it wasn't, we were able to be a little bit more universal in those 2 years, or were we still making adjustments to get them to the target for FY '25? Do you remember when we're thinking about that salary scale as we're looking at it? I mean, again, we shared with you the 3 years. And again, it is still settled, so I can look at it a little bit more carefully and get back to you on that.
One of our goals is making the highest step on an annual salary to $30,000 for the Unit E staff.
Right.
Because they're currently highest step, they're below the $30,000. So there's no fixed percentage all across the board. But that's something we are trying to do in the future, but not in fiscal year '25.
Okay. So you anticipate that you're gonna get it at some point in time where it's gonna be uniform? Because this happened 5 years ago too, and it was kind of complicated. A lot of people couldn't wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, the goal is to get it to where where we were able to do what we've done with the other units.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody else wants to talk.
Heather?
Is the bus contract settled? Because you just said all contracts, so you're just talking.
Oh, sorry, that's it, yeah, I'm just
Just
talking about
employee- okay.
my employer contract.
So
The bus contract, we've been negotiating, but it's not settled yet.
And when I look in the budget, it's actually, I saw the sheets that you presented the other night, and, you know, it's kind of like almost breaking even with the fees closely. But what's in the big detail is a much higher number. Is that the sped piece?
It isn't, yes, that transportation piece is
So it's like
included.
3.5 million, but
Yeah.
2+ is sped. Okay, and is that included in circuit breaker? I know there was talk about that at one
It does.
point.
Transportation is part of the allowable expenses that are reimbursed.
Is that new?
Only if they're out-of-district students, so we do a lot of in-district
Okay.
transportation, and that is not claimable. But yes, it is new, that came up, with the Student Opportunity Act, that we were allowed to start claiming.
Okay.
And, we are always hoping to reach the 75% threshold, reimbursement rate.
Okay. So evolving, just focusing on bus fees at this point, I think in that chart that Kristen had at the beginning, it shows the 444 as one of the drivers for this override. But in these revolving funds, we have huge balances, and specifically for busing, it's a year's worth of collections. And I'm not really sure, I know you guys have it on your plate for policy discussions, but I think even before you get there, you know, it's hard to ask the taxpayers to support the 444 you need for the increase when you have 700 sitting there to use. So I would encourage you all to use some of that and reduce the asks, since it's money that we've all paid into the system that's sitting there. I don't foresee you needing to hold that. This is the rainy day that you would use that money for. Otherwise, I don't understand why you would hold it.
This is not holding for some kind of fee of reserve. This is not rainy day fund, because based on the quote we received from D-Bus, it's not just, you know, for the regular yellow bus, you also include athletic runs. That's a huge portion we're gonna use for the transportation. Currently, the athletic run, the cost increased almost like $150 for minimum run. Used to be $250. Now it's $400. The cost almost double. So we have to get some reserve in our general fund, just in case athletic revolving account doesn't have enough to support the sports transportation. That's why we need to have the money there. It's not something we keep it as a raining fund because we're gonna use it in fiscal year 25. We can,
Yeah, I can see that. I feel like it's a little muddy with when you pull in at the athletic piece to the bus piece. But you know, I know in these budgets, year after year, we've had issues, and you know it's going to be tight, and we budget bus fees at like from the revolving fund $655,000 per year or $700,000 per year. But in actuality, what ends up happening is much less is offset than that. And the information we got from you, FY23, the offset is only $380.
the reason because we receive APA fund support in fiscal year 23. Otherwise, in every year, we use the full amount to supplement the bus regular transportation. So because last year we have this APA funding support, that's why we didn't use the full offset. If you're looking into fiscal year 22 and going forward in fiscal year 25, we're gonna use the full amount, 700,000, definitely, if without any kind of federal funding support. That's the main reason you don't see the full amount in fiscal year 23. But we're gonna use 655 in fiscal year 24, and going forward 700,000.
But you'll still end the reserve fund with over $600,000 every year, right? It's still projected to have that.
The $600,000, that's the revenue level we usually receive within a fiscal year. Think about the maximum revenue level is $600,000 to $700,000. We're gonna use up the whole thing in next fiscal year. That's how we balance out the revolving account. How
So you're
much?
treating it kind of like circuit breaker. It's got 1 year in it.
Yes, we must keep the reserve over there so we can use that for next year.
And is that the same policy for all the other reserves?
No, it's not same policy, but for fast fee, it's similar to circuit breaker. We have to have this ending fund balance so we can use that for next year. If we don't have enough, that means we shouldn't budget for such like a revenue level to offset our expenditure.
Okay, I'll think about that.
Anybody else?
Just,
Yeah, I had a question, sorry, if I could just jump in, because it's on the busing. This is Chris Barrett.
Go ahead, Chris.
So two questions. One, did I hear that the bus contract has yet to be finalized?
Correct.
Okay, and then the second question is, did they justify why those, that jump in fees from 250 to 400 for like the special transportation events like athletics?
Yes, they did. When we looked at, we had actually been, what we were paying was well below market for a long time. And so when they presented that to us, the first thing we did is we also cross-referenced it to the other districts and to look and see, and it was in line and still less than some of the other districts are paying for that. But apparently we had been paying an incredibly low amount for a long time.
Remember how they said it's hard to find people to do that shift?
Thank you. Yeah, they did talk about the idea that it being an additional ask of the employees, and so it's been increasingly harder for them to find people to run those routes as well.
Awesome, great, thank you for the information, appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Go ahead, John, did you have something?
just a point that if anyone else looks at this, one of the data points that we had asked for and you did provide was the enrollment per section at WA. One of my questions is, like, I'm seeing a lot of English 9 CP classes as max enrollment 2, let's say. So is there any kind of explanation of how that works, and is there a better way to present this?
Well, this is the raw Power School data, first of all, right? So in terms of, we're just sharing with you the raw data. In some cases, when you will see caps like that, it's because there's an additional, the students, the 2 students there that might be in that cap are actually going to be in another class as well too. So it would be, if we're making sure that students, and we're providing additional supports for those students, and they might be included in another class, but we're capping the number of students that then we're placing that need supports in a specific class. So that's one example where that might be a reason why that would exist. But yeah, there aren't, and then sometimes there might be a special education class specifically that does have a very low number on it because of the specific course. But in that case, when it's the same course as another course, it's because the students are being included with another group.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I just want to finish this up with a question. I understand that there was, I'm having a little problems with my town email. So I understand there was some information provided regarding the school reserve accounts. And I was wondering if you could just give us an overview of those, what they're used for, how they're accumulated, and what the totals are.
The total reserve for our campus reserve is about $1 million. We did provide a breakdown for the campus reserve in the FinCom Google Doc. And the majority, about $670,000, we have the reserve for Unit ABC on the settled contract with the reopener language, because that's the amount we need to meet the identified target for the competitive pay for our teacher, curriculum coordinator, team leaders, and nurses. And that's something why we have to keep that in comp reserve, because that's for our contractual obligation. And if we cannot meet the middle average level for the market rate, we might end up with like Newton. We don't want to, have anything happen like that. And other than that, we have Unit G, and we reach the tentative agreement, so we must have a reserve for Unit G. The remaining portion of that $1 million, that's for our non-union and exempt employee. Because we have done a compensation study, they are also below the market average. So that's the amount we have for those non-union personnel. Based on the new allocation from the town, we have to reduce another $350,000 from our total budget for the override scenario. So we further reduce $114,000 from the non-union personnel comp reserve, which will tighten our ability of flexibility to negotiate for non-union personnel. So that's basically everything in the comp reserve. And how do we adjust in the 350 reduction budget scenario? And so we already provide everything in the detail.
So you have there's about $2 million in total for comp reserve for both?
$1 million.
Okay, I thought there was one for non-union people. What's that one?
No, it's all the same, it was all the same
It's
thing, yeah.
everything in the same bucket.
Can I just clarify? That's the operations side of it.
All right.
That's like in the operating budget that gets us to $100 million or whatever it is. Can I keep going? Are you done?
No, I was just.
So on that, I'm still stuck on a lot of this revolving fund stuff. And if I back out circuit breaker, and now I back out the 1 year bus fees, and I'm not counting the cafeteria and lunch stuff, I'm still at like a $3.8 million amount when you add up all these reserve and revolving fund balances that are outside of operations. So, I struggle with the growing balance, and FinCom has talked about this for years, of the school choice accounts and it not being used in the budget. But it seems to me that the comp reserve would be the perfect opportunity to really lower that revolving fund and use those one-time funds, because it doesn't look like that comp reserve is continuing through the years. It's really that one.
Comp reserve we're using when we're in negotiations, right? Like,
Right,
that's
it's
the
only
whole-
in FY25, because it will be.
You actually have
It will be
to.
in the salaries
That's
in the
right.
future years. So you have this one-time $1 million or slightly adjusted lower
Right.
charge. So I'm just kind of curious why you wouldn't try and use up some of these
Because it,
savings.
well, if you think in terms of comp reserve does go away every year, right?
Right.
So it is going to be it needs to be part of the equation because it will, in theory, then be in those salaries. So it'd be unsustainable if we used one-time funds like school choice to support it, because then we'd still have that cliff later for that purpose. Like what you're describing with
right.
comp reserve. Comp reserve, you really need to just look at as it is really part of our operating budget for FY25. It just has yet to be distributed into a specific line item, but it will be.
So I guess I'd still focus on using some of these revolving funds, because if I remember, school choice is like 1.6 or 7 million.
Currently is 1.4.
And you're gonna get another, what's the increase every
It's
year?
about- it's-
800,000?
No,
400,000?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like
So
if we're making a commitment for fair pay and all that, and we're getting this money, and it has been growing in the years I've been on FinCom, why not fold that into your equation on a permanent basis?
So we are using our offset with school choice is projected to be the amount that we are projecting to take in. Okay, that is something we have increased it so that we are looking to use what we anticipate to come in so that it's not continuing to grow. One of the things that I've talked about since I've been the superintendent has been bringing that reserve fund down. And we do have specific expenses that we already have it targeted for. One of the things that we knew with this year was that we would be utilizing school choice to cover the special education costs when we finally realize what those actually end up being, really, which won't be till the end of this year. But that's what we need to have built into FY25. So we already were prepared to use some of that for the one-time cost there, because we don't have a sufficient special education stabilization fund, which is what we would rather see built up
Would
for
you
that
be
purpose.
using that too then?
We would, well, so we only have $500,000 and we've built it up to that, to $500,000 for the special education stabilization fund, which we believe, special education is so fluid and flexible that we should be treating it the same way we treat health insurance, right? That these costs, we need to be able to, project and budget something a little bit more sustainable, knowing that then whatever the additional costs are, that we're going to have the funds then to cover that. But we're not there yet. We don't have that fund. And so in terms of our school choice account, one of the things that I'd shared, similar to something that I heard Dan say in another meeting, he hasn't said it tonight, but he said it earlier, was just the way in which the town is looking at free cash. It's free cash is the correct term, right? When
Yep.
you're talking about for the AAA bonding, right?
Yes.
School choice, the 1.4 million is 2% of our budget. And so, yes, we think we should be using more of it and spending it down. But to actually use all of it would then leave us without any of the funds that we have for emergency one-time use funds that we do use, right? We are using it for new curriculum, universal curriculum that we're gonna have for our K-5 schools, which we haven't had, which we think is going to be an impact and help us moving forward. We had actually talked about that the last time we were together. That's gonna be a significant cost over the next couple of years, and we're committing that money for that. We did anticipate that we would be spending down more of it as we were coming off of the fiscal cliff for full day K, the tuition-free full day K, and we haven't needed to use as much of it yet. So that was just as we were going through the year, when we end up using at the end of the year, we didn't necessarily have to utilize as much of it, but as we had projected. But we are still committed to that. The concern is, again, using any of these one-time funds for a problem that we know is going to be consistent over moving us forward. And it's really similar to the conversation that you just had about the rec department, except we're not bringing in, we are the budget, right? So as opposed to that's my concern about using the one-time funds in many. So, but I do hear you, and I think one of the things that we were even thinking about and talking about was, okay, so the $1.4 million, if it's 2% of our budget, let's say that was the direction that we got from the school committee, right? And in collaboration with the FinCom and with the select board to say, we want you to utilize these funds. While that wouldn't be my recommendation, what I would be saying is that then we really would need more we would need to see close to that percentage guaranteed to us every single year moving forward. You know, so instead of the 2% or even the 2.89 that I've seen the last 2 years, we really would need to be able to see that. So if there was some sort of agreement that we knew that the school allocation would be at least a 3%, which I know that's not something that we can necessarily do, but that's sort of the thought process behind it. So it actually acts as our free cash in many ways. That is the way I would look at it.
I see that, but I also think that there needs to be for, you know, you've talked about the special ed reserve not being high enough, but by not utilizing some of these revolving accounts on a regular basis, you're kind of eroding what you're left with at the end of the year that you can throw into the reserve then. And, you know, I mean, you guys know the list of these accounts. I'm gonna use music fees from 3 to 5. I don't know why we're not charging that
Right.
every year, and then by doing that, then you have more at the end of the day
Right.
to
In-
your
in-
free cash to put
right.
in the reserve.
And the music fee is another good example, right? Because that in itself grew because we didn't need to use it for a period of time because we weren't paying an employee from it that we normally do because someone had left and we actually hired a long-term sub that then came out of a different line item for that. But that was one of the conversations that we've had recently, even from the conversations that we've had here, was, okay, well, are there additional offsets through that department, right? Because it's been used for the salaries for the teachers who are working with the 3 to 5 students, right? So is that something that we could use to offset just other teachers in that department, not necessarily working with those students, things like that? We are looking at that. And just like I was going to say, it's the same thing as what Jenny had explained with the transportation account, right? Like we did benefit from the ARPA funds being able to support that fund, which so we didn't have to spend as much at one time, so we've ended up saving some of that. It's the same thing with the music account, that it did grow because we didn't actually need to use it as much at one point. But we are looking to see, again, but in a sustainable way. We do think that we would like to see the general practice being that we're using what we're bringing in, right? And then for one-time funds, what are we able to use these other things for?
But I would be careful and caution with the one-time fund thing, because if it's unless you're ending the program for 3 to 5, you're going to get those funds every year, and it's to the tune of $130,000. I mean, I think that should be included in your budget every year.
No, but that's what I'm saying, is that is what
Yeah,
we're,
yeah.
that is what we're, it's
Right,
what
I
we,
wouldn't be
the
worried about-
anticipated, I'm saying, like, if there's $300,000 in there, the 130 is what we are offsetting it, because we know that we're gonna be getting that. We haven't, we don't want to be committed to spending $200,000 if we're only gonna be getting 130.
But I would say you need to commit a little bit, because 300 is too high, or the music fees are too high that we're charging the families.
But with those carryover balance, we cannot use that, the full amount from the carryover balance. We can only use the yearly revenue maximum. Otherwise, we won't be financially responsible because we can
Yeah,
only.
I see what
Yeah,
you're saying.
we
I
are
just,
looking
these
for-
balances have gotten out of control, and they need somehow to be incorporated into.
Right, if we increase just for this year to offset more
Right.
in the operating budget,
Yep.
that means next year, we can be ended up
Right.
with the trouble for a financial cliff in the future.
Yep.
So that's our difficulty about that.
Tom has a
Yeah,
question.
so Chris and I were talking about revolving funds earlier, so something I've seen work well other places, if there's some sort of rules-based way that you're doing it, like student population, some inflation amount, so that you've got some way to say we've got a good amount in there and now we're gonna start doing something else with it. It does look like some of the accounts have grown pretty significantly. And so in a year that we're gonna ask taxpayers to dig into their pocket and pay more tax, we're gonna have to explain the growth and why the growth needs to be there for something specific, or implement some sort of rules-based method for saying there's no reason that this fund needs to be above this plus inflation plus adjustment for student count, and so we're going to use that as a guideline, and whatever's left we're going to flush out or use for other purposes. So I think we kind of need something, or at least on the town side, I was saying to Kristen, we kind of need something like that, some structure that explains why we have what we have, and that we're not keeping something that we're not gonna ask the townspayer for another tax dollar unless we've got a pretty well-defined reason why we're holding these reserve levels at the way that we are. And so if you're thinking about that anyway, and it sounds like maybe you are in the policy committee, if we could do that quick, so we can kind of see if there is some in this current summation that we can say, okay, that it's a one-time issue. We understand it's not an operating issue, but that whatever amount of money that is probably should be used to solve this much more general set of problems we're in than keeping them in those funds, because we can't really explain a reason why we need that amount instead of something lower. I'm sorry, it looks like Valerie's
Yeah,
got-
good,
I just wanna follow that, which is, can you step that through till FY '26 though? Like, that's my mental block with this, like, I don't understand how we would solve that cliff. Aren't we creating a cliff for ourselves?
Well, you're not creating an increasing draw on your operating fund by relieving what's in the fund, right? I mean, you're not over obligating the future of your operating fund by doing that. It's saying if you've got 500 in a fund, and when you do the responsible needing to cover a sudden change, it really only needs to be 400. Then that 100 becomes available for, in the same way you'd use free cash. It's available for a one-time activity. You're not saying you're going to cut your budget, because in future years you're not going to make up that
Okay.
one-time offset, if that
So
makes
like
sense.
next year's allocation would still be based off of this budget, not minus that?
Yeah, I think so, because you've got a relief valve already. The relief valve, you're not reducing your budget, but you're saying we've got a relief valve for overexpansion of these revolving funds, if that makes sense. What do you do if a revolving fund grows too fast? You have to have a rules-based method that says, this is what's responsible, it makes sense, we're balancing it, we don't need this anymore, we're gonna return to free cash. But you're not reducing your future budget and penalizing yourself. In the next year, if you have the same thing, you exercise the same formula and you do it again. I think. That was a little bit of a speech, but that I think is what we were talking about today with revolving funds, because we need to get some method other than just, they're gonna accrete forever unless we decide, because it's sort of nice to have them, but we shouldn't be asking taxpayers for money instead of saying, you know what, we can free that up because we don't have a need for it.
Can I just make one comment? And I did the one-time thing, but I do think that there's a little room for, some additional, looking at some like the FTEs, the WA, and the class sizes, and if you used them a little bit FY '25, you might find some savings that come in would replace them. It buys you a year, because, it's not the time to say this, but even the task force stuff came out in October. We're in budget season now, there's not a lot of time to implement all those recommendations. So as small as we can get things now, and then possibly, I don't know what the select board is gonna decide, but if there's a second override coming in a year, and this one's smaller, it gives you that year to get the efficiencies in place, which it seems almost impossible for them to have happened to a great scale in this budget. I mean, I think there's money in there that could reduce.
Tom, did you?
Yeah, a couple things. First, on the revolving funds, just throwing it out there as another idea is perhaps if activities, let's just say, is, if that fund has grown and, maybe it's a rebate on a given year. Maybe it's, next year's, 50%, and just state it's 1 year. Just throwing it out as an idea of a way to kind of bring those back to check without impacting that budget allocation, but also helping the taxpayer pocket. Question on the comp reserve. If that unit G were to get signed and ratified and whatnot, would we potentially see this, just call it 25,000, removed from comp reserve and moved into salary?
It would appropriately then go into the salary
Yeah,
line item.
so, okay, so we might see that
It
number.
would still be in the, well, you'd see
Yeah.
that go down in comp reserve, but it would
Yes,
still be in the
yes,
budget.
but the comp
Yeah.
reserve number may change, okay. And then the last thing I will say is that, it's almost too bad that the state doesn't allow the special ed fund to be treated like the snow and ice fund, where you can run a deficit because you run into some extraordinary cost throughout the year. Just that's kind of what it really is, because we're required to clear the streets, we're required to pay whatever comes your way for special ed. So that's something to keep in mind. So.
Just my last question is, there was reference made to a reopening clause for the contracts. Now, we've just gone through a period of time where the town has footed some resources towards these salaries. Can you explain what the mechanics of that reopening is? I mean, how soon does that happen? Is it all dependent on whether or not we have an override or not? And I'd like to hear that.
Sure.
Explained.
So the language is such that if the town of Westford is able to identify additional funding, then it would be possible for us to reopen the discussion about the salaries. And so it doesn't say override. It says identify additional funding.
I don't know where you're gonna find them, but that.
Well, at that time, it's a good, I mean, at that time, that was before the budget task force, right? So that was when we were talking about a whole bunch of different things and not necessarily knowing what the outcome would be. The target and what I had shared with the FinCom and the Select Board and the school committee previously was that in order to cover that gap that we had identified, that the teachers would need 2 years, FY25 and FY25 and FY26, of a 4.6% increase. We hadn't started building the FY25 budget yet, and so what we agreed to was a 3%. So that $660,000 is the difference between 3% and 4%. It's a 1.46% of that, and so we didn't know if that would be possible because we hadn't even started this process yet. And but that was the identified target. That was the actual amount that we know in order to get them to the middle of the comp. So many times we've been saying comp, that the comparable districts, right? So if we find additional money, right? So then if that is located, and now we're talking about an override, the idea would be is that if the override passes, then we would be able to change the 3% to the 4.6. 4.6.
It's only there's a change in orientation towards collective bargaining here that I've kind of found interesting. In the past, what you try to do with bargaining is you sit down with your bargaining group and you try to come to an agreement that carries a certain period of time, what the grades are going to be. What I'm seeing, it's interesting, is that there's like a little open-ended clause all the time. This is an open-ended extension where, well, maybe if we get more, we can open it up. As far as management of a budget and the management of a town, that interjects a little bit of an instability to all of this. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Okay, because the best way to run it is to have a term contract for a period of time with a percentage, and we try to make what we can. I mean, we have to weigh it with others, and if we do that, I think we'll be in better shape.
I agree with you, and it's the only contract that has that language in it, and it was because of all the different circumstances that we're looking at, right? And it was necessary for the two groups to come together to say, okay, we want to start the school year with a settled contract, so that honestly we're not looking at what other communities are looking at, so I think that was an important thing. But yes, I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree with you, and it's the only contract that we have that has that specific language in it.
Anybody else?
Sorry.
No.
This is more like future to a degree, because one of the other areas that I see potential savings is with this reduction in student population versus the buildings that we've had when we've had a much larger. And I know you've gotten the state involved, but I'm just curious. It made me think, well, if they got the taxpayer to agree to rebuild Robinson, where would those kids go in the meantime? You would be shuffling them into another space?
So that is one of the considerations that goes into the process, right? Are you able to do construction while students are there. So depending on projects, you might be able to do something like that. You might be able to do an addition on a building, and it, you know, might impact the outside space, but it wouldn't necessarily impact the internal until you get to where they're connected, right? So you could that would be a part of whatever the feasibility process as we look at what our options are. Because with the MSBA, that project will have 4 possible outcomes: doing nothing, just bringing everything to code, doing a renovation, and then doing a new construction. So that would be the things that will then come back to the community, that we will then, as a community, make a decision on as to what we want to do. And so all of those things will be a part of that, right? Like, what would happen if you were in that bringing it to code and or the renovation piece? What does that mean? The other piece to the MSBA process is that the eligibility period doesn't even start for us until August, because they space out all the different districts that have been invited in for their own funding purposes. It'll start in August, and then there's actually 9 different modules, and we had talked, Dan, I'd shared that information with you just the other day about we wouldn't be looking at the potential for any type of project really to start until, I think we said it was FY28.
Yeah, for construction.
Right? For it to actually start, whatever that is, because it'll take FY25, FY26, and FY27. If we continue to go through the process, that's going to require different votes, both by the school committee and by the town at some points as well too, as we go through those phases.
So FY28 would be construction, FY27 would be the ballot, or the town meeting questions, probably.
But it depends. There's a couple.
Several votes.
There are
So
a couple,
there's
right?
A feasibility study
Yeah,
vote.
we'll have to have a vote next year just as to whether we can go into the feasibility study. The town will vote, because we'll have to figure out, funding for the feasibility
What's
study.
the other feasibility study then?
The
That's
feasibility, it is different. So what we did last year was a higher level overview of all 10 of our buildings and for the master plan. The MSBA will do a very detailed feasibility study on the building and or buildings. We're talking about looking at Abbott and Robinson as a consolidation. So they will bring all of their engineers in and do a much more comprehensive assessment of the buildings.
Thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you.
On to general government. I'm gonna just cruise through some of these. First is select board. Anybody have any questions on that budget? Our manager.
Sorry, I want to make sure I have the right folks in here. It's kind of.
Christina, can I just?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Do you need to call? They're adjourned, or are they gone?
Leaving.
You're adjourned.
They're adjourned.
You're adjourned.
I don't know. I mean, we never have our own minutes, so I don't know.
I think you're fine. I think you're good.
There were some questions that we were talking about with the sustainability coordinator, and I was just curious.
So we're in town manager budget.
Right, are we?
I think so. I think
Okay.
that's part of the budget. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if there was any thought, when I kind of read through, and this is kind of gonna jump a little bit. When I read through some of the answers on different things, it almost seems like we could consolidate some of this. I think you said the assistant town manager writes a lot of grants, well, the sustainability coordinator writes a lot of grants. So I'm wondering if that could be, just throwing it out there as something to think about, a combined position. There was also a lot of talk about accounting and payroll happening weekly, and, the unions are the reason we have to do it weekly. I feel like there should be pushback to an every other week, because our accountant can use his time much more valuably to the town. In my experience in accounting, we held the risk positions. We dealt with all the insurance in accounting. It happened at 2 different employers I had. I assume it's typical. So I think there needs to be pushback with the unions. I don't know if that's a renegotiation. I sure hope not. But
It is.
yeah, so I mean, it's tough to be beholden to that for something that's just so time consuming. And then being able to free that individual up, because, there is pressure on this budget, and, you hate to lose some of the grant writing from the sustainability coordinator, but it does seem to move seamlessly with that assistant position too. So just throwing it out there as a potential.
Yeah, in the past, I believe the assistant town manager did write some of the sustainability grants, such as green communities. Now there are so many different opportunities and incentives and tax credits that the assistant town manager could not manage all of those plus the other work that they're doing. So the sustainability coordinator is really becoming an expert in those tax credits and reimbursements and working with utilities and others. It's not to say that it couldn't be combined if we're in dire straits, but the assistant town manager will have a lot of other duties that they'll have to focus on that are not sustainability related.
Yeah, I'm just, you know, the no override, I just hate to lose some of that, some of those synergies.
Anybody else? I mean, I'll just, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was going to say something that's a little, I'm not sure it fits in this meeting exactly. It's sort of a policy question, but just so you've all heard it, one thing that I'm struggling with is one of the things that came out of the Town and School Safety Task Force was one of the biggest risks of life to and wellness in our community is suicide and substance use disorder, and that's part of why we brought the Community Wellness Coordinator resource on, and I think both that resource and the other resources deploying to that are connecting people with resources, are finding programming, are sort of building a web. And I know that it's a tough budget year and there's a lot of trade-offs, but something I've talked about with the town manager is I might even favor some other difficult trade-off instead of that because I think the need is so high. We also recently got a community survey list from Community Teamwork, which is one of the social service groups that covers this area, who did an independent survey of residents of Westford, and the top concern was mental health and wellness and access to mental health and wellness resources. So I'm struggling a little bit with that particular trade-off, which I've shared with the town manager already, and it's something I think we'll talk about more, but because it does relate to money and other trade-offs we might make, I just wanted to say it in front of this group.
Sure.
Is that a shared position in amongst
community,
towns?
The Community Wellness Coordinator?
Yeah.
So the Community Wellness Coordinator, it's there's several pieces. So the Council on Aging has a social worker, and they have two part-time outreach coordinators. Then the Board of Health has one full-time Community Wellness Coordinator. That is through grant funding, and that is shared with 3 other municipalities, so not just Westford. So I would say 0.25 FTE. And then through the town manager's office, we have a community wellness coordinator that was initially funded through ARPA funds, but we have been stepping that in through the general budget. Dan has the percentage of what that currently is in the general budget, general fund, but that position has been very busy and has shown that they are bringing other groups and other organizations together related to that.
They couldn't regionalize that person, they just wouldn't have the time.
Well, we already have one regionalized position.
Right, but I mean.
But the other one, I don't think we could regionalize. I think we're using them to their full capacity.
Okay, and then just on the regionalization thing, why did Carlisle stop using this to be sharing the cost of the
They
sustainability?
decided to combine, and I believe this was true the last time I spoke with their town administrator, they were combining their planning function and sustainability function into one full-time position. So they did not see the need for sharing with Westford.
It was, I think there's a military term called mission creep, right? When I was listening to Jennifer Claro last week, she talked about the fact that they had hired a social worker. And the social worker was geared towards basically helping the elderly, but then she mentioned that the social worker had started to pick up cases of people who are much younger than that. Mm-hmm. So the concern I have is that now when you you've talked about now 3 social workers. There needs to be
we have one social
one
worker.
social worker, but there's
Other community
other
wellness,
communities, right?
which are not licensed.
You take that plus the Board of Health, there needs to be a consolidation or a focus on what the goals and objectives are in this to be able to give us an idea whether they're measurable or not. You know, Tom was talking about concern over suicide and drug abuse. I've been sitting here for 5-6 years now, asking for figures on what is the death rate for overdoses. I can't get it from anybody. All right, so if we were serious about trying to monitor that, there would be a measure like we do with other types of diseases in town, whether it be cholera or whatever, right? But they won't list those, and that's important to have, so we can measure whether or not these programs are even gonna be effective or not, so.
I mean, I would agree we need to do better. I think we have asked, and I think the answer's been that we don't get consistent reporting, because if the ambulance drops somebody off, we don't sometimes have data about what happens afterwards in terms of the health outcome. But I agree, it's such an important need for the community that we need to get better at consolidating
I mean, we can even
domestic
take an
violence,
estimate.
substance use disorder, and
Yeah.
suicide.
Yeah.
And the community wellness coordinator under the town manager's office has been collecting data. I know she gave a report to the select board, I believe back in July or August. She continues to refine that data. So it's coming, it's just not clear. And yes, one of my goals is to look at either consolidation or being more clear about the duties. We've been meeting very frequently with those positions and those departments over the past few months.
Good.
Yeah, because I think I'd mentioned that last week too, so that's great that you're kind of concentrating on that piece. As far as the sustainability coordinator, I just kind of wanted to say that I was really happily surprised at that list and that $2.5 million that should be coming to the town over the next couple of years. We haven't seen that up until now. When we became a green community in 2012 or something, we had a goal to reduce our energy use by 20%, and we never hit that. A lot of other communities did. I don't know how they did or not, but so, personally, I see a lot of financial value in that position that we have not seen previously. So, just want to give a little plug there.
Is she involved with the schools?
She does work with Jeff Goodwin, the facilities
Their
director,
buildings.
very closely. Their
Okay.
offices are right next to each other, so they're constantly coordinating, and yes, her services go towards the schools as well.
Somebody else who.
Just clarification, I think I'd asked a question about whether or not administrative costs from green communities are factored in, and I somewhat remember the response. Previous community I was at, I believe that they were able to take at least even just a nominal amount out of the green communities grants towards administrative costs. Are we trying to?
I don't
What's
believe
that?
we've had that opportunity, but we can look into it.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll kind of jump around here. Next one's us, Finance Committee. Anything? Any questions for us? I think I'm willing to give up that $165 though for the conferences. So there you
Nobody's
go.
gone for a while, so if you guys.
I know we haven't used it. So that
Give up our Dunkin' Donut card.
shh. No. Finance Department, Town Accountant, Board of Assessors. Yeah, I think we had a couple questions on that one.
Good evening.
Bill Nicer, Chief Assessor.
Do you want to? Go ahead. You go.
Okay, I'm gonna start with one that's not quite just assessors, more for the audience here. Since I've been doing this, and I've been on Capitol, vehicles have been like my there are so many vehicles. We have 7 pages of vehicles out there that were on our insurance register. And, this group has one, this group's got one, this group doesn't, and they're paying mileage, this group has one, and we're paying mileage, and I feel like we really need to, for FY25, get some sort of, I don't know, do you put meeting rooms on a calendar? Make it a meeting room, but call it a car, and get these departments to stop using mileage and use these cars, because if we're spending $40,000 on these cars, and they're going 35 miles a week, I don't want to pay for it out of capital. I'd rather give Uber money. It just doesn't. It drives me crazy. And it's not just assessors. There's building and planning, and they're driven so low. And then in 10 years they come to capital and it's got 40,000 miles on it and it needs to be replaced. And it's crazy to me. So
We're incorporating that into also the fleet maintenance consolidation discussion. So we've had lack of staff to be able to focus on that right now, and I don't want to use that as an excuse, but that is something that we are looking for. And Will's office has been more than generous about offering that electric vehicle when necessary.
yeah, and I just think that there's mileage somewhere else in one of these other departments, and it's small, like $2,000, but that's a lot of miles actually, and it just drives me crazy when I know there's cars out there that can be
We will
used.
focus on that.
Okay, so now more specific. The data collector, and in the comparison with the Patriot Properties contract, were those compared like fully loaded versus the contract?
What do you mean fully loaded?
Benefited and all those extra additional costs from having the employee?
Well, what we looked at, we had when I arrived in May of 2021, that contract was in place. The 3-year contract with Patriot Properties for services of cyclical inspection, personal property, 504 accounts. So it was a service contract for our office, our department. What's happened is I've discussed it with Dan, and we did a couple things. We changed that position, so it's a data collection position. So there's some of it's administrative and some of it's field work. So I feel confident that we would be able to do all of the personal property work in-house and shed a contract of a little over $40,000 a year, and do a better job than Patriot Properties. So that was my take on it.
And then presumably the person is able to do other work outside of what they would have to do in that contract?
They would, so the contract encompassed some real property and some personal property. So the duties among the 4 full-time people in the office, we'll be able to handle that. I'll be taking on some of those duties with personal property. And the data collector will take on some administrative stuff.
I guess what I'm asking is that data collector able to contribute to the department outside of those duties? Or is it just strictly for?
No, it wasn't a perfect, like, get the data collector position to replace that contract, so, but it encompassed quite a bit of it.
Okay. And then one of your goals said, and I saw that you answered this, but it said to review commercial, industrial, and large residentials and convert value method to income approach. But in the answer to the question on what exactly that meant, it wasn't like a big difference. So I was just curious why that's a goal then, if we're.
Well, it's a little technical, but what we do is the software system runs typically at least 3 different methods of valuing property. And when you choose a final method, whether it's an income method, cost method, or sales or market approach, that is system driven. So we run all of those approaches, and then in the final analysis, I choose what approach I want. So an income property you would choose the income approach. So we have to update both the cost tables and the income tables in order to get values to align similarly. So we're using both of those methods, but in the end, we choose one to display, and that's what shows up on the tax bill.
So it's a kind of an annual task as opposed to like this being like a one-time goal for FY.
Right, it's.
Okay, that's
yep,
what I was kind of
yes.
trying to figure out. Okay.
What's that, Heather?
Just interesting question, maybe you can help me out, because I've been asked this from several people. You know, on property tax increases, there's Proposition 2.5, which kind of limits how much the town can actually assess on the actual levy, right, per year. But then there's the assessor. The assessor comes in and he can, or you can assess property based on property value, surrounding property values. So if there's an increase in property values, that can impact somebody's property. Is there any limit to how far you can, increase that property based upon their previous level of payment? So,
No.
so it's unlimited then, right?
Individual property, there's no restriction on up or down or neutral. Proposition 2.5, as you know, works on the aggregate amount of real and personal property we collect. We multiply it by 2.5, and then there's some other things that happen, but that's the aggregate tax amount. Individual properties, neighborhoods and so forth, there's no limit on an adjustment.
So it is what it is, right?
It's an adjustment, so we do an analysis, so we take the sales that occur within a year. So you take a small sample, this is called mass appraisal. You're taking a small sample, analyzing that small sample. So say you have about 200 properties, plus or minus, that sell each year that are what would be considered arm's length transactions. So you're analyzing where the assessment level is and where the sales go. So that those 2%, if they went up 10% for single families, then we adjust everybody up about that much. Now the differences would be lots of differences. Land, neighborhood, style of home, all those things we can drill down on and do an analysis on each one of those. So that's why you may have changed 7.5%. The house next to you could have changed 10.5%. So there's differences there.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks are kind of confused about that a little bit, just so I just want to raise that. Thank you, that was a good explanation.
Can I just comment on that though? But if those houses are going up 10% or 7% or whatever, the whole levy can only go up 2.5%. So that means there's something going down, and I think that's where the taxpayers don't really understand. I think you all issued a press release from the shift from commercial, and that was helpful. But it is important to remember that somebody's going down if someone's going up more than 2.5%.
Well, what you're doing is when you look at the over $6 billion in value, your share amount, the more value in the town of Westford is obviously residential, and it's shifting even more. In the past 2 or 3 years, if anybody's been awake, the residentials have been crazy. They've been very high, been jumping. We changed it by 14% last year. This year was about 8%. And the commercial, if you look at the commercial industrial share, minimal. The offices, are they selling? And are they garnering higher values? Absolutely not. So that's why your shift is more towards the residential share. That's what's happening.
Do you expect those shifts to keep happening? Because, when you talk about the override, there is that additional piece.
Yep.
And then there's the capital items that are excluded debt. But then another piece that people get surprised by, myself included, is that shift that kind of changes us. So do you feel it
Nobody's
leveling
going to be more keenly aware of an override situation than me, because I'm going to get about 1,000 abatement applications. So believe me, I'm well aware of that. But
So do you see commercial kind of leveling out
well,
and where it's
what's the market? So I have 2,000. So remember, we're a year behind. 2023 is come and gone. So that's my analysis year. I can start to look at things and preview stuff, and I can give it to the town manager or to Dan, and we can view that. But just knowing what's happening, no, I don't see commercial industrial. I don't see any unless someone can help me. I don't see anything crazy happening. I think the residential is modified. I think it's probably gone down, but it's still where your increases are going to be.
This is where the support for the economic development services will potentially help. It won't necessarily be help tomorrow, but
I wonder if it's worth an update, like you had said, mid-year later from Enterprise, if it's just kind of give a heads up on.
Yeah, or next November when the tax rates are set. That's probably a good one to watch, the select board meeting.
And I'd be happy to do some type of preview of that in the summertime in say August or September, where we could look at the values and see what's coming, what changes I'm looking at, because usually I'm done my analysis by probably the end of August.
Thanks. Because one thing I was looking at is, so I think in 2022 the commercial, industrial, and personal property did go up 7-8%. I forget what the percentage was. But then this past November, they were practically at 0, and it all went to residential. So why?
It's the sales. So again, what's selling and what we send out income and expense, we poll the commercial landlords, and we get returns, and we see what vacancy rates are, and we go through that process. But when you're not seeing those values by sales, and I also look outside. I'm looking at more industrial areas or commercial areas like Billerica.
Yeah.
Or I'm looking at other places, and those, certainly office buildings and commercial areas, the commercials are not, they're not garnering what they what they have in the past.
So you're not just relying on the answers back from the commercial
No.
property owners?
Right, number one, that's confidential information they submit to us, that's not available, but we use it, I review that to say, hey, it's $22 a square foot, now it's 16, it's not increasing, it's decreasing. The escalations are not there, they're going the other way, so that's where the value is decreasing.
So, the data that the commercial real estate owners send you, is that going to be manually fed into the system by Westford town employees?
We keep an Excel spreadsheet on that information. And again, that's not public information, that's information that's taken in, we review it, and then I'll go into the tables and make changes on cap rates, vacancy, types of lease types, net leases, triple net leases, whatever it is, we're making changes in the background.
I'm not worried about the privacy thing, that's not the focus of the question. I'm worried about, are all the towns in Massachusetts operate similarly, that all the commercial entities send the data and they would put into some sort of proprietary system?
Right, it's a requirement to send that out. You can impose penalties for people not returning that information. I don't know if the previous assessor did that.
They did.
And I don't, I mean, $250 or something like that,
Is there an effort ever done by the state level or Westford level to some kind of create a portal where they can enter the data? So they send the data to you in an email or spreadsheet, and you just decipher the data and put it back into Excel spreadsheet. Every year it goes on, and it's kind of a pretty laborious process, right? So I'm assuming you said like 4 people on your department exclusively does this?
right, there's,
So,
You're way ahead of the Commonwealth there on that.
well, it's 4 employees, 350 towns.
That's
We're
too much
looking at
sense,
like, to take it as feedback. It's not an
Yeah.
insinuation, or it's not a thing, anything. It just, I feel that if we are looking at process efficiencies, that could be the one of the place where we could use people more efficiently. And a second thing, I heard that you said the property values in the commercial are sticking flat and then there's just not increasing, so the overall tax burden as a cumulative dollars is moving towards residential. 2020 to 2023 year, my property tax went up 8%, meaning 12.3K to 13.3K, that's my jump. And that's 2.5% overall town, so I personally am assuming like 3.5 times more. And would that, now if we have override 7%, would that hit me with a 20% hike in the tax bill?
will you see a 20% hike in the tax bill? I'm sorry, I didn't, what was the
Yeah,
question?
that's the question. So in 2023,
Yeah.
we increased the tax rate by 2.5%, and my personal house went up by 8%. So if we do 7% this year, would I see a 20% increase in my tax bill?
It depends on the values
Yeah.
for this coming year.
Right.
So it changes year to year.
Probably
Yeah.
though.
One,
I'm still trying to say, because the commercial trend is not changing 23 to 25, right? So that's, so I see probably either there, okay. So now at least I got the answer why my tax bill was 8% last year.
I think I saw somewhere, Dan, or Will, because of the shift, what the average residential increase was. Instead of 2.5, it was slightly more because of the shift in, but the average was not like 8%. The average was just slightly over 2.5%.
Mine was 8% too.
The,
I did the
I
we're
have-
talking value,
I
we're
found-
talking tax.
He should
talking
have
tax
the bill,
bill.
not me.
Tax bill,
The residential, the average, so if we don't have this number, I don't want to, it's not a pop quiz.
Yep, I don't.
But I think I did see somewhere, because you're right, the value of the residential grew faster than the value of the commercial. And so it was the case that the average residential grew faster than 2.5 because that's 86% is residential. So it grew a little bit faster, but didn't grow 8%. So I was trying to give the residents what the average expectation should be. It's higher than 2.5%, you're right. And I remembered seeing that number somewhere, but I don't
Yep.
know, have it off the top of my head, so maybe we'll dig that up for you.
one thing, if everyone's dying to know more about assessment, I do have my, my my presentation is on the website.
Oh, that's
So the tax classification hearing has a lot of information, shows a really, well, I'm patting myself on the back, but has a really good thing about Proposition 2.5 and different percentage value information and tax information. So take a quick look at
It's a good
that, I think.
presentation. It is,
I will.
honestly.
Can you send email to finance or
It's
should
all-
I go to assessor?
It's
Go to
all
the
on the
assessor's
website.
website,
Okay.
it's in the
Westford
first little
.net,
section.
assessor.
So,
Do you have anything else, budget-wise?
Quick. Just one comment. I don't think that Red Hat's been affected yet, so there might be more shift, right? Because Red Hat's leaving. So that might, I mean, we don't have to get into it, but it's out there. I think one of the things is with this commercial, like, people want to understand what is coming on that's a future capital project they'll be borrowing for, what their override amount will be, but also, you know, I've heard concerns, is Red Hat now gonna put more of that burden on me like
it
it
will.
just happened for some of us? So that's just one comment. One quick question, apartment buildings that are run by a company, those are residential, not commercial, correct? Or are they commercial?
Nope, they're under anything.
They're deemed
that has
residential.
habitation is under residential, whether it's 5,000 units or single family.
And then one thing that I've always kind of wondered, because we have, I don't know if open space is the right, but we have land set aside, and I think a lot of neighborhoods that can't meet the zoning of 1 acre or whatever it is, they'll have tracts of land set aside as open space. How come that's not ever like a CPI or some kind of adjustment on that land value every year? So for example, in my neighborhood, I have a circle. It's been valued at $7,800 for eons. It did just go up a couple grand, but like, why is that not every year kind of like absorbing some of that 2.5 for us?
It should be going up when I've changed land values of, this is my third year. I've changed land values twice, so I think you've seen adjustments upward, but all those are covered under land adjustments. I think previously, and you're right, if I looked at the history, they didn't change at all, but when I make a change to land, it should be covering those unless they're exempt property, which I don't think that is, if
Yeah,
it's,
no,
if it's
I don't
owned
think
by
so.
the
Okay.
association. But you should see changes in that.
And I have lately. I was just always concerned because by that not going up, that made more of it come to my house.
Right.
In
Right.
theory, right? So, but that's good to hear, so.
Anything else? Are we done with? Thank you so much, Will.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anything for the treasurer collector?
Still a tax generating
So.
property.
Legal services,
We're worried about that. People would have improved.
human resources.
Just on legal services, there was a spike in legal services. What was the reason for that, just generally?
It was the firearms bylaw and then the McMac, the MBTA communities.
So, all right, fine,
Anything else on legal? Okay, next is human resources. Go ahead, Heather.
This has come up in a couple accounts. I think the other one might, I don't remember, it's later in the numbers, but it seems like there's some resources that are provided to the employees. And I'm just curious why they can't use the same resources that are provided to the residents. And I'm sorry, I'm not more prepared on what those exactly were, but it was in the questions we had. I mean, it's in human resources, but I think it's also in unclassified. I feel like it's one of those pieces that's kind of in like mental health. It's kind of in a couple different spots. And so I'm trying to pull it all together and be like, what?
So we have Pam online. Do you want her to explain what the
Sure.
programs and activities in her account are versus the ones in the 945 unclassified?
Yeah, that's where the other
Okay.
one is. And why they can't be together.
Hi there. We've got employee programs that are truly only for our employees. So we've got our employees that are on our health insurance. And in years past, our actual health insurance used to run programs for us. And through the years, we've lost the funding, and then the town made the commitment to keep that. So in our efforts is trying to, change some of the behaviors or healthy lifestyle, have employees have more healthy lifestyles, get them moving. But these programs are truly just geared towards our employees.
And so what are the ones
what's
in
the one in-
945 then? The unclassified
Those
ones?
are the programs that Pam just explained is the 945 there. Those health and wellness programs.
And what are the ones in 152?
So the ones in 152, those are like the employee appreciation type things. So typically there's a holiday function.
Employee, thank you. We have in years past, we've had a luncheon, and then we have a barbecue where the town pays for the hamburgers and condiments, and then the employees bring, all of the side dishes and whatnot.
Okay.
Dennis?
There are just two. There was a spike in legal advertising and also in professional development. Can you explain what that was about?
So the professional I can take, that's where we have education. So we had, we had the director of the DPW who was taking courses. So we've got some specific coursework that's been pre-approved that sits in that line item. So that line item is truly just for education.
Is that an incentive program? Or in other words, do they get paid for going, or is it just paid for their attendance?
It's paid for their attendance.
Okay.
And they sign an agreement that they must remain with the town for so
period of
long,
time.
and if they
Okay.
don't, they repay that. The legal advertising has gone up because we have seen such a spike in having to advertise for job postings and positions. Pam, is there anything else in legal ads? That was my understanding.
No, the legal ads, we've got that, and then the other one would just be our pre-employment physicals, and our police and fire also include psychologicals. Then we've got DOT, for our HEOs, those are special physicals for DOT employment physicals that include alcohol and drug testing that has to get sent out. So there's a lot of expenses that come along with new employees coming on board.
Are you finding that you're having some issues with turnover as well on the town-wide side, or as far as people leaving, or has it been stable?
I mean, there's been a healthy turnover with people either leaving to go to somewhere closer to their own home or getting in a different field. We've done a lot of recruiting over the past few years, yes.
And there's a lot of retirements just in
And
the
there's been a
past
ton of
3
retirements,
months.
yes, thank
There's
you for
been
adding
a
that.
lot of
It's not
retirements.
just people moving, the retirements have been quite large as well.
Thank you.
We had 9 alone this month for attendance.
What was that, 9?
9 in January.
Yeah.
Anything else for HR? Okay. Thanks, Pam. We'll move on to technology. I think Mike Wells, we saw him maybe online. Anyone have a question for technology? I think I do, actually.
You had one about the savings.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, could I just ask you, I think it was in the Prop 2.5 constrained budget, there was something about, pushing to monochrome printing versus color, and you had mentioned in the questions that it could potentially be a $5,000 savings. Do you think that would be possible to pull in to?
Hi, good evening. Yeah, good evening. So yeah, when we put up like charts to show us how much we've spent on colour versus monochrome printing, we spend nearly half our budget on colour printing, which, considering it what a small portion of the page count it is a lot. And we've already taken some steps to try and reduce that in the police department. We've moved some printers around, bought a new monochrome printer to make it easier for them to print on monochrome and colour. And at the moment, I was looking at earlier today, we are on target to keep the basic toner costs within 30k for the year, which would be good if we can do that. We've got some other costs in that line item as well, but I still think there's more to go if we can further restrict the use of colour printing. If that's, it's not something I want to do, because people will like to print things in colour if they can, and it makes them more attractive. But on the other hand, if we're looking to save money, it's a lot more expensive to print colour things than it is black and white, and it's even more expensive to print black and white on a colour printer than it is to print on a black and white printer.
Right. Okay. So maybe we can look at pulling that in, regardless of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, we started on it already. We did that stuff at the police station to try and reduce that.
I had another question on the unneeded phone lines, the copper that you're kind of making your way through to figure out which ones are still active and not. Just curious, is that something that a WA senior could do as a capstone project, or is that too involved?
No, the reason it's a thorny problem is because it's involved and it's difficult. First of all, you've got to comb through these bills and try and figure out what it is we're paying for. We recently had a line we were looking at which had an address. The address on it was 5 Pleasant Street. Well, there isn't anything at all at 5 Pleasant Street. Actually, it's a bill for a phone line going to the Forge Beach that I know for a fact hasn't been working for years. And once we figured that out, of course, we could cancel it. But often it literally means going into the buildings, following the wires from the DMARC to see the labels and find out where they are. It's just,
okay.
I have to say, it's verging on immoral what the companies do, charging us for things they know we're not using.
Yep.
But there we are.
So Mike and his team have been very diligent about tracking down landlines as well as cell phone lines that we may have been paying for. So I appreciate his work and his team's work. It's going to be short dollars now, but every little bit is adding up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's cumulative. It may only be $40 a month, but when you multiply that out by the number of months and then the number of years.
Yeah, no, it's thank you, because it's absolutely silly to be paying that for anything. Anybody else have any questions for technology?
Just one question.
Dennis?
So I know we've talked about this before, Mike, but I noticed that your network support costs have gone up, as well as contracted services. So I assume they're basically the same thing. And I know that prices in technology are volatile. Is there any possibility of of entering into any sort of an extended contract for set increase, or is that something that's just not workable?
There are some opportunities. We could look to try and sign 3-year deals for things like our antivirus software, which would save us some money. We haven't done in the past because getting multi-year contracts approved is always a harassment, because we have to get the special language in them and then get them in front of the select board for approval. But there is some possible room for manoeuvre there. Yeah.
And my experience on multi-year contracts for some software is that give you 3 years, but you have to pay for it up front. And then things like antivirus, that's going to be a somewhat variable cost based on your endpoints. So you have to take that into account.
But the thing I'm trying to raise is that now we've seen this with, we saw it with the water department, we've seen it with the engineering to some extent. I mean, I understand if you're in a situation where they're just not gonna cooperate with you and you have to take what you got, but I mean, it would seem to me that we should make every opportunity to try to get these balanced and get them stabilized. So we can kind of count on what's gonna happen over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, a significant part of our software costs going up this next year in 25 will be the Microsoft contract, which is a 3-year thing and it's up for renewal. And we've got 2 things going against us there. One is inflation. So after 3 years, we're going to get hit, I guess, with some inflation, significant change there. Also, there was a clerical error in our favour when they did the quote for the previous 3 years, where we ended up not having to pay as much as we should have done for the whole thing, and they honoured that. So
If you can
that's
beat
gonna
Microsoft, you did pretty well.
Oh, I don't think it was Microsoft who was out of pocket. I suspect it was the VAR who ended up paying for that.
Anything else for Mike? Nope. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Town clerk? Anything? I spoke to her earlier, but any other questions? Nope. Off the hook. Permitting
You're all
department?
set.
You're
Yeah,
all
we're all
set.
set.
No
Okay.
questions. You're done. Yeah.
Don't try to justify anything.
So permitting, anything? Anybody have anything for permitting? I don't think I did.
I think permitting was another one that I just questioned, some of the interns and whether or not some work could be, leveraged against some senior work off people to help out, and even if it's to reduce work on other people in the department, increase efficiencies.
Yep. So we did provide a brief response. In general, the types of projects that we would use them for, we don't believe they fit well with the senior workers. Last year we didn't take advantage of it because we actually had a senior capstone project, which was student, which was great because they were actually our shadow student from the prior year. So now we have someone that has corporate memory, came back to us twice and is, coming back March 23rd town meeting to vote for multifamily housing zoning bylaw amendment. So we're gonna see if these monies are available, if we can get someone like that, because it would be very efficient and would fit right in. We get a lot of use out of that individual. So we don't think it's a good fit in general for the senior workers.
Does that mean you are a specific individual? Each year is the same person? Is that what you're
No.
saying? Oh, okay.
Nope.
Okay.
We just have a very good opportunity here if we can have it.
So next is Conservation Commission. We're kind of gonna also take land management, just because it's same guys. Before you get settled, dude, they may not have any questions for you, I don't know. Conservation Commission, land management.
Land management.
Okay.
I was just, because I was reading it kind of in rec, and I was reading it in Board of Health, and I just needed clarification. The Board of Health performs the testing on the waters, but the fee for that is in the budget of land management and recreation, is that right?
The analytical fee for the beach testing comes from the property owner. So where the Conservation Commission operates 3 beaches around Burgess Pond, same thing with the rec department at Forge Beach and Edwards. The analytical fee is paid directly, is invoiced directly to the operator, as opposed to, a private entity who has a commercial pool.
Okay, I was seeing it all over, and I was just trying to figure out, is this another thing where you kind of have little bits and pieces everywhere? And then is land management the one where you're hiring somebody at Stony Brook to?
I think technically it's in
To collect fees?
171.
Oh, sorry, I missed it.
But it's for an attendant similar to, as currently exists at Forge Beach and Edwards Woods. Looking to have, the commission has received complaints from residents about the activities going on, and there isn't anybody there. So the commission is exploring a nominal non-resident fee similar to Edwards Beach and Forge Pond Beach, and maybe just the presence of somebody there, will deter those who don't intend to comply with the rules and regulations to go elsewhere. A little bit of monitoring, we feel like can go a long way.
And now would that go, it doesn't sound like that, the fees would cover that position, and would that be going through one of our revolvings?
That's revolving offset, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was intended to be used through the revolving, the EBC revolving account.
Anything else?
Just one, the reduction in, I forget which line it was, the testing that would not happen.
Yep.
Right? What, in layman's terms, impact would that actually have
So
on the community?
ultimately, in my opinion, the lake associations and the homeowners around it would be borne with the cost of, the monitoring, the invasive species. Again, Westford is blessed with numerous water bodies with, fantastic water quality, and, the management, the monitoring of such, that in turn drives property value of, around those lakefront properties. And so in the near term, I think it can be absorbed, but all 7 water bodies identified during the five-year management plan, and then the second 5-year management plan that was funded through CPC originally, they're all water bodies that are wholly contained within town-owned property, much like Burgess Pond, and Neshoba, the one out off Vinebrook, or have public access, much like Nabnasset, Forge Beach. There is direct access to the water bodies, public access to the water bodies. And so that's the management, the monitoring, those are community resources. So, investing into making sure that, they're not overrun with invasive weeds, nor, harmful algal blooms, the swimming conditions are safe. Those are the biggest impacts.
So it would essentially be taking the protection of a community-owned resource and making the neighbors pay for it.
I think so, yes.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Planning Board? Zoning Board of Appeals? Once, swing twice? Town Hall?
You're running too fast.
Nope, okay. Public Buildings? There we go.
Do these public buildings have programmable thermostats in them that kind of, the library closes at 9, temperature can drop to 55 and then kick back up at 7 a.m.?
We have Jeff online.
Jeff's on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, they do. Most of our buildings actually have building management systems in there where we can control the systems through a front end of the computer. But any buildings that don't have building management systems do have very good thermostats in them. And we do set our buildings back at night to reduce the temperature.
Okay. I know sometimes residents put their heat down just a degree or 2 because of everything being tight. Are we thinking of doing that at all in the town buildings, or are we gonna keep them where they've always been?
We are always looking for efficiencies with our buildings. Some buildings take a little more to rev back up in the morning than others, and sometimes the cost of getting them back up to temperature can be greater than if you keep them at an ambient temp overnight. So instead of dropping them down to 58, maybe getting them down to 62 or 64. Each building has their own specific characteristics. So we're always looking for efficiencies and better ways to operate each building.
I think I'm more asking, I picture the little old lady who wears her sweater and her coat around her house because she doesn't want to turn her heat up over 60. If we're running our buildings at 70 in the winter, could we run them at 69 or whatever the numbers are?
In my opinion, yes. I have some folks in certain buildings that require a lot out of their temperature and like it at a certain temp. We try to keep everybody at a comfortable temperature, but yes, in my opinion, we could be running them all at 68 degrees each day. It's a challenge to keep everybody happy.
Oh, I'm sure. I think of just, again, the little old lady who's wearing her winter coat and not turning her heat up this year.
You'll find electric heaters under desks if you
Yeah.
go too low.
I could go on and on about temperature control in every specific space for a while, but
Okay.
yeah, it is a challenge in my position.
Okay.
Anybody else? Jeff, can you, I thought I saw in the narrative that a heat pump at the Main Street Fire Station failed recently. Can you I mean, that building is like 6 years old, and I think there were issues with the heat the first few years. Can you just comment on what exactly happened with that?
So the primary heat pump for the furnaces at the Boston Road Fire Station did go this year. The commercial warranty on that pump is actually 6 years from the date of manufacture. So, of course, the building being 6 years old, the pump was manufactured about a year before construction started for the building. So unfortunately, the pump was not under warranty anymore. And because of the technological nature, and these pumps have become so advanced in technology that they are not cheap replacements anymore. And yes, there was a substantial cost to replace that pump.
So I think just as a general comment, I wouldn't really support cutting back on any routine maintenance in our facilities because we're just going to come back to bite us in the end. But I see this common theme, and I think I said this at another FinCom here maybe last year, that we seem to have like problems that are worked into our buildings like from when they were built. And, obviously, I don't think any of us were here at that time, so nobody here in this room, but it would be nice if we could start holding our contractors or designers or builders or whoever more accountable. I mean, I've been hearing about problems with that heating system since the building first went online, so the fact that it then failed, 5 years later and it was out of warranty really is aggravating. Not that we can do anything about it at this point. It's just.
I certainly share your frustration, Christina. Moving forward, there is a statute of limitations for which I can hold people accountable, and that is definitely my goal moving forward as we do these projects. As you all know, we have a very large retro commissioning project that was voted on at the fall town meeting coming up at the police station, where we're trying to rectify some of those issues that you just referenced. Moving forward, I think that buildings do need to periodically be retro commissioned because things change, equipment changes, and that's certainly a goal of mine, to stay better on top of making sure that the buildings are tuned and running the way they're supposed to be.
Thanks.
And hopefully through doing that, we can intercept these problems before they become failures.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dennis.
I have just one question. It's a general question of policy. Regarding contractors, for example, the contractors and the design people that you picked off, for example, would construct something like the fire station, are you free to go out and solicit anybody that you want, or do you have to take them off of a state bid list?
We do have a HVAC contractor who has won the bid for the town a few years ago when his company was called Cooling and Heating Specialists. They had been our in-house HVAC contractor or contracted HVAC company for 4 or 5 years. They have a knowledge of all the town buildings. That gentleman who owned that company has currently moved to another mechanical contractor called Premier Mechanical. They are on the state bid list, and right now they are the company that I prefer to call. Anytime we have bigger jobs, we do go out and we get bids for all that work. When it comes to larger construction projects, I think that we need to become more savvy in how we write up the scopes for these projects and the engineering we get, so we can eliminate bad bidders in the future. I think that there's been times in the past where if the scope of the project isn't clear, we end up getting certain bids that come in really low, and that should be a huge red flag for us. If there's a bid that's $70,000 lower than all the other bids, there's got to be something that they're missing in their scope, and I think that it's alluring to get that low price tag, but we certainly end up paying for it in the long run.
But you're not limited to a certain list of bidders. You're free to go around and solicit anybody you want?
I am, yep.
Okay.
I was just curious, because you brought up the police station and that issue that's been ongoing, when we build municipal buildings, do our building inspectors look at stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just kind of surprised, since it's a insulation type issue that's been there from the start, how it kind of, seems like it fell through a lot of cracks, not just one, and now we're paying for it. And then my other question is, it's hard to get a handle on the maintenance staff. Is there like a plumber, an HVAC, and an electrician in the schools? At one point, I thought there was conversation about that.
Yes, there is. So we have 6 maintenance personnel that they technically work for the school department, but they have been shared between town and school buildings over the years. So what we have on staff, we have an HVAC technician who is retiring in 4 months. We have a in-house plumber, in-house electrician, we have an in-house carpenter, and then we have 2 buildings and grounds groundskeeping personnel as well.
And the one that's retiring, are you planning to replace that person, or is it better to kind of outsource with the, you had mentioned all the equipment seems to be more technically advanced and always evolving?
Yeah. My goal, I'm hoping, I'd like to post that position and see that if I get some good candidates that can fill that role as an apples to apples replacement for him. The reality of it is that our skilled contractor or our skilled maintenance technician salaries, we're working to make those more competitive with some of the other towns. The reality of it is that an HVAC technician can make much more money out in the private sector than they can working for a public entity. So the reality of it is I may not be able to fill that role exactly as we have it today. And for the next year in FY25, you may see an uptick in what we have to pay for skilled contracted labor for HVAC.
So it's cheaper to have somebody in-house if you can get that person.
It certainly is. And like I said, my goal is to try and advertise the position as it is today, but depending on what we get for a crop of candidates, we may have to modify that and see what other options are available to us.
I think, and just my last comment, I think it's kind of, we talk about how maintenance and everything is always deferred. I think it's hard for FinCom to kind of get a handle on what maintenance is outsourced and what maintenance is internal, especially since there's the staff, because we always say that we're neglecting these buildings, but they're obviously doing something. So anyway, just a comment.
I think, just to touch upon it real quick, we've been using the Brightly maintenance software for the past year and a half now, and we're really starting to yield some valuable information in there as far as where our staff is spending their time and how they're spending their time. And I think that moving forward, I'll be able to share a lot more with you about how our crew is spending their time. So I think there'll be some better information to come.
Thanks.
Great.
And I think it's important to know that, neglected maintenance is not necessarily not making a fix, but it may also be putting the Band-Aid instead of making the true replacement that's needed. So,
Anything else on buildings? Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. So we already did land management, debt service. Any questions, Heather?
I needed clarification on something I asked. The Plain Road Phase 2 sidewalk is in the override, but not in the no override budget. And I was confused on how that works, since I'm assuming that was approved at town meeting. Like, how would that come out of the non-override piece?
Plain Road one? I believe that one was in both.
I believe it was. It's Plain Road Phase 2. It's at the very end of page 148. It's in the column fiscal 25 non-override.
Yep.
I don't have a dollar amount there.
That's the the very bottom.
I think we're gonna try to use mitigation funds for that.
I mean, I do see it in the following years. I just couldn't understand, like, is the project being deferred, and is that under the purview of board of directors, or is it mitigation funds, and that's my answer?
That could be part of it too, where we have that ability, but if you look at the dump trucks below it too, it could be just where we borrow short-term to figure out how we want to proceed with that too. And we
Okay.
didn't schedule a debt payment for any of the 2 new debt projects in FY '25. So it buys us some time basically to figure out how to proceed too.
Okay. And then I'll just throw in my plug that I don't like that we're borrowing for 4 trucks. And because
We're gonna be talking about that tomorrow. We're
I
gonna be
figured we
changing
would.
that using
Yeah.
fair share apportionment
Okay,
for a
good,
portion
that would
of
be great, because it frees up $150,000 from the operating budget, from Show Me the Money
Right.
comes right off the top.
For 2 of them, we could do that, but still it's
Maybe we won't
it's an
approve the
impact.
other 2.
Yeah, well,
That's for
it's a
another
tomorrow
meeting.
conversation.
Okay.
I mean, there's only so many trucks and people, and 4's a lot.
Anything else on debt service? All right, so anything for the whole risk management unclassified? Any questions there? Heather?
Questions, sorry. Okay, so this is one of the programs that I was talking about with the 152. It looks like there was, programs that were vaccines for the employees, and I just don't understand why they're not just going to the Board of Health vaccine clinics.
There's somebody that can answer that.
Oh, I can speak to it if you want.
Sure.
Okay. In the past, the health insurance carriers actually purchased flu vaccine for the town, and the department administered them, and they made money off of the programming. It was a wonderful situation for the town. That ended in, let's see, I think it was 2018 when Blue Cross Blue Shield stopped doing that, and that we have not had that situation happen again. But we had that in process, in place for many, many, many years.
So is it that I forget where I saw it, is it that the verbiage is not current, or is there still money in the budget for that?
No, it's completely separate. So anything that the health department that has to do with the vaccines for town and the residents is completely separate from the health insurance at this point in time.
Okay, and in that same account, there's sick buyback here, but there's sick buybacks in other departments. And it sounded like from the answer that this is kind of like reserve money again. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's money, it's kind of like an unfunded liability. So when someone leaves, these monies are owed. And we did let's see here, we've got a spreadsheet here. You had asked for a 10-year look back. And over the last 10 years, we'd actually exceeded the amount that was in the budget, with the exception of 2021 and 2020 during COVID. But other than that, that 50,000 has been exceeded every single year.
Okay.
And so if the budgets are able, if the individual departments are able to absorb it, they do.
Okay, so like fire or police would use theirs, and then when they're done, they're gonna come to this dollar. Okay, and then it's, even here, it's not enough to cover what, okay.
Correct. Yes.
And did I see an answer for what the premium is? I think I did, right? As far as our premium for health insurance compared to Acton's or Littleton's, was that in there?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so as far as that's concerned, so the percentage of the contribution levels is used as the benchmark. We don't go in and actually dig into what every single community's premium is and what the utilization is, but it's the contribution levels that are compared amongst the communities.
So I think that that's an important thing to know, because if you tell me I'm contributing 75% of a $100 premium, that's a lot different than another town contributing 60% of a $1,000 premium. So I'm having trouble kind of wrapping my head around only going by a percentage, because it's not really telling me anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts with the health insurance. So every single community does it a little bit differently. You could have high deductibles, you could have differences in co-pays. So if you're just going to look at the premium, you still are not getting an accurate picture of what the true out-of-pocket costs are for the employee on top of what the premium is. And you also don't know if there's contributions that are made by the town, say the health savings accounts. So there's, like I said, to put them all together, it's not as simple as it sounds. So what they've done in the state is we predominantly use these contribution levels, where it's the actual percentage of what the town pays and what the employee pays. The average has typically been about 75% for the state, where Westford has come in at 65% for our HMOs, which, you know, is lower than the majority of our comparable communities and in this, you know, statewide.
But again, it won't matter if our premium is lower. So I think that's where I'm really stuck on. And I get what you're saying about the different variables. I'll
Yeah.
have to digest that a little bit.
Yeah, one other thing working in Westford's favor is that only 58% of the eligible people are actually on the plan. So if that premium were to go down, and it could drive more people onto the
Again,
plan.
the
Right.
other way, like I know what I pay for insurance, and I'm just kind of
Right. So all these things, like, it's, you know, each individual employee is going to do what's best for them. So, you know, right now we have a lot not on our insurance plan.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act, and now that we are self-insured, we also have to be careful to not drive healthy people off of our plans, because it actually just removes straight dollars that would come out of our plans to pay our bills. So it really is it's a tricky balancing act.
Then my last question is, because we're self-funded, and I know that it's been tough lately, what is the point where we kind of go and say, maybe we're not, maybe we need to do something else, maybe we need to get into some big collaborative with a negotiating power and go somewhere else? Is there?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are in the midst of a very unusual trend for Westford. We typically run, I think, a little heavier with cancers and whatnot, but right now we have 15 members that have exceeded the $125,000 deductible in the last 12 months, and we've got other members in line that will be exceeding that coming up soon. So it's, you know, we rely on the brokers, we rely on a lot of the, you know, the forecasting and what they're doing with the numbers. When you take this all into consideration, you also have to take into consideration the run out. So we would have to also, if say we were to come out of a self-funded situation, we would also be responsible for the run out period, which we'd be looking anywhere from $3 to $6 million on top of going into paying premium if we were to switch over from how we're doing it now. So it's a great question. I don't have an answer for you, but it's certainly something that is very much, you know, I think a part of the discussions for the health insurance trustees, and it's what we're looking at when we're looking at information every month and how we're running. And I don't know if Kristen has anything to add to that, or
I'll just add, you know, we've been surveying our area communities as well, and they're in different scenarios, and they're also seeing premium increases because not only because of the experience, but just because of health insurance costs. So we're going to continue to discuss, you know, can we offer a high deductible plan? Does that help us? Does that hinder us? It's just a lot of math that we need to go in the back end. But the Health Insurance Trust has been meeting on a much more frequent basis to review our status to make those pivots when necessary.
Yeah, there was discussion a few years ago about linking in with GIC. Has that ever been explored again, or is that a dead issue?
It's an option. It's just, you know, we would be at the mercy of whatever their rates would be and can't control our own destiny. Their plans are also limited compared to the plan that we offer now. So there's trade-offs that we need to explore.
I mean, that is the state plan, right?
That is the state plan, yes.
Anything else? Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
So that finishes up the budget reviews. I'm gonna make the executive decision that we move the capital and revenue to Monday, since it's late.
Though? Sorry.
Which one's? Oh, I was doing the whole thing. Sorry. Yeah, did you have any more?
Oh, yeah. OPEB. Sorry.
I did that. I was doing the whole risk management on classified as one big. Sorry. All right, go ahead.
So the $1 million in last year's budget and this year is 1.4, and I know we have to close a gap, but I'm just curious about why we would put that in there. And I know we supplement it with free cash.
Yeah.
But I guess, in my opinion, it would be better to keep it similar to last year and then supplement it at a later point instead of putting the stress on the budget.
Yeah, it's it's good to keep building in because that deficit's getting bigger and bigger because we're not contributing enough. So, and keeping up with the policy, especially after the COVID. So, ideally, it's in the budget, but we have used some free cash to fund a portion of it in the past when things are tight.
And what is it usually budgeted at? If I look back to the actual, but like, is it?
We're supposed to be paying the normal costs for employees hired after January 1st, 2012, but it's kind of leveling off a bit because people who are hired in the past 10 years, they're leaving too, so it's really stabilizing. But you know, the cost of the OPEBs is going up slightly each year too. So the $1.4 million is about where we should be at to get back on track, because we did cut that back a little bit during COVID, and we tied it to like the meals and hotel tax and lowered it. So we had a good excuse and a good mechanism to bring it back.
And is there? I mean, this pressure is on all the towns to close the gap. Did we compare to anyone else at some point, and are we ahead of the game? Are we behind the game? Do we think at some point somebody's going to change the rules and be like, all right, you don't have to do it by 2035, you can do it by 2050, but then Westford's all paid up.
Yeah, so right now there's no mandate for the OPEB because everybody has to fund their retirement system by 2040, which we're on track for 2036. So, but they are just forming an OPEB commission now,
right.
which I'm really excited about.
Legislation.
Yes.
Okay.
Dan's not going to leave us for the OPEB commission. He's promised me.
Did you get it in writing?
Right, Dan?
It's on a text message.
You could be king.
I'm just so excited about that. So it's one of those things where they're probably going to be looking at mandating it, I'm assuming, at some point, and come out with requirements for cities and towns. So
But
it's
right now we're not.
right, but it's good we're doing something in the budget. We have something built in because 12 years ago we weren't funding anything at that point. So we have built that up to a pretty sizable balance, which is great.
They do also they do ask that question in our bond rating calls as well, of are you funding this? So we could be dinged if we don't.
Were we dinged in past years when we were lower level?
No, we've stayed at AAA since. So, but they always have that caveat: if that starts to drop, you stop contributing to it, then they will look at that negatively.
But in the last couple of years, it's been lower than what we've got allocated now.
Yeah.
So we could make that choice.
So it could. Just can't guarantee the AAA bond rate. We can't say they will lower it either. So it's just sort of playing the risk.
They didn't ding us last year, but you're right, they could, but we don't know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's something they mention every year.
Yeah, it's a piece of many other
factors, right?
Yeah.
And you never know how many years they would, if it's 2 years, they go, okay, 3 years, they may go, no, we can't let that slide anymore.
yeah, I guess if we had concrete reason to think based on some actual feedback that we had to make that part of our choice, I'd feel one way.
Yeah.
But there's like a million factors, so we can't assume that that's going to affect us because that doesn't make sense to me.
Capital on Monday, huh?
Yeah.
I think Pam has something that she wants to.
Oh, no, I just want to add the importance with the OPEB is we have on our plans with that growing. So we are approaching becoming upside down, where we actually insure more retirees than we do active employees. So just to, keep a little perspective on that, if that helps at all.
And we're paying for that cost out of pocket rather than contributing to the OPEB and having that funded. Like the water enterprise, they're self-funding their water retirees.
Yeah, so we good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Because Capital is meeting again tomorrow morning, so and since we're meeting Monday, I'm gonna make the executive decision that we push those two, because it's also late and this is, week 4 in a row. And I'd like to get through our minutes at least and approve some of them, because we keep pushing them.
Are you through with
You
us?
guys, yeah, I think we're done. We're gonna go
I'll
into
entertain a
minutes.
motion to adjourn for the select board. Second? I need,
Anyone else out there?
I need Scott.
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. All in favor, Andrea?
Hi.
I think Chris is out there. Chris?
Yeah, I'm an aye for that as well.
All right, thanks, Chris. And Scott, I'm sorry, I just can't see everybody on the thing.
Aye.
Okay, John. Aye. I'm also an aye. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll see you.
Thank everybody. Good night.
Good night. So the approval of minutes, have we had a chance to look at them?
I didn't see the changes in what you attached that I had, but maybe they weren't like show changes.
we bring them up. It was basically exactly what you had for changes in the 11th minutes.
Yeah, it was the thing about the water commissioner having some suggestions for efficiencies, and then the whole library. Should we be budgeting all that money if we're gonna put it in storage?
Do we want to just approve it with amendments if, and
Okay, that's fine.
Dan can add, 'cause-
It's
there
up
we
here.
go. Okay. Okay.
Can we,
Can we approve all of them, or do we need to separate them out for any reason?
Dan?
I can look at the 25th, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We can do the other two.
I can do the
Different
first two.
attendees
Alright,
and different
Then,
attendance, so.
how about a motion to approve January 11th,
So moved.
2020?
Second.
Second? Okay, all in favor? Beth?
Aye.
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 Dennis?
Aye.
Aye. Kari?
aye.
Aye. I'm an aye. Shelby?
Aye.
Okay, so January 11th is approved. January 18th, 2024, because I get a motion to approve those
Moved.
minutes.
Second.
Second? Beth?
Aye.
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 I can't say your names fast enough. Aye. Shelby?
Aye.
Okay. And then the 25th, January 25th, can I get a motion to
Can we,
approve those
that's
minutes?
the one that we both messed up.
I didn't see it, I didn't read it.
Okay, so do we want to,
Can we wait
Push
on
that one.
those?
want to push those? All right, I'm okay with that. Okay, so we're gonna, Dan, we're gonna hold on the January 25th minutes,
Right.
but we
So
approve the other two.
I'll revise the agenda for a Monday night's meeting at the Millennium, by the way.
Yes,
Um,
Millennium.
And I'll add that in the two presentations as well.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's it. We've got, future meetings, Monday, Millennium, 7 o'clock, and then we've got a little bit of a break. But just remember that the February 13th, the select board meeting is probably another good one to go to. I imagine we may want to post just in case.
If
There's
you
a
post
quorum
it, you
there?
could go on my calendar, it's easier that
Yeah.
way.
Do you think we'll be taking positions on the 15th?
I doubt it.
On some articles, you may be.
Oh, on articles, maybe, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, not the budget, I wouldn't, I doubt it's gonna be ready by then, but,
We can discuss it more for sure, but
Yeah.
we'll probably be taking positions on some of the articles.
okay.
And when are our write-ups due?
I think that's not until March 1st.
Correct.
Yeah. So FinCom book is March 1st, which, is still a little, not quite sure what to do with that.
So we might need
Yeah.
to put another meeting
Yeah.
in between, potentially.
To at least figure out what
Our
the,
positions.
what the FinCom book is gonna be. Well, we have another meeting on the 29th.
That'll give 2 days.
And when we do the write-up, are we doing like override budget, non-override budget in
question.
the book?
Yeah, we're
Or
trying to figure
are
that
we
out.
going to have one budget presented in the book?
So right now, we're planning to present two warrant articles, one an override budget and one a non-override budget. So I would plan for that right now while you're working on your outlines. If that changes, we'll let you know.
So perhaps the override budget and then just what the reductions would be and what the
Additional
trade-offs would be.
reductions in a non-override.
Right,
would
and you
be-
can follow the budget book that I prepared related to those. You know,
Yeah.
there will be adjustments, obviously, but we tried to do a good job in that initial
Yeah.
presentation of these are the overall cuts in the override budget, and then these are the additional cuts related to the non-override budget. So
Yeah,
we're
I think
happy
the
to help
narrative,
with that.
the narratives are pretty good, but, all right, so that's,
That's in your presentation that you did way back.
It's in like the 186 page budget book
It's in the-
that you. I
Yeah.
think
This one
have-
right here?
Yes.
Oh, the thing at the
Yeah.
beginning then?
Yes.
Each-
Yeah,
Each
okay.
department has their narrative, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I think so. Motion to adjourn?
Made it.
Second, okay. All in favor, just aye.
All right.
Aye.
Shelby?